I thought I knew the forest. I thought I could handle it. I'd been hiking alone since I was a teenager, following trails, reading maps, trusting the patterns of the trees. But that night, everything changed. It started with a path that seemed familiar, though I knew it shouldn't have been. I had been following a marked trail, the kind that hikers like me took for granted, the kind you think will always lead you out. The sky was already heavy with clouds, and I set off, gray and low, pressing down on the pines so the forest felt smaller, tighter, as if it were shrinking around me. By the time I realized I had strayed, the sun had disappeared behind the horizon, and the woods had swallowed every last thread of light. I didn't panic at first. I told myself it was fine, that I'd retrace my steps. I checked my map on my phone, but the battery had drained faster than I expected. Nothing, just darkness and the smell of wet earth. The ground was soft from recent rain, and the trees dripped water like they were crying. I remember thinking that even if I stayed calm, the forest didn't care. It wouldn't pause, wouldn't let me find a trail, just because I was anxious. I started walking in what I thought was the right direction. I counted trees, noticed bends in the path, tried to follow any memory of the markings. I told myself that as long as I kept moving, I would find my way back. But soon, every tree looked the same. Every fallen branch and shadowed hollow seemed identical. I began to hear noises that didn't belong. Twigs snapping under weight that wasn't mine. The rustle of something moving just beyond my sight. At first, I convinced myself it was animals, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound had a rhythm deliberate, like someone pacing, waiting, watching. The rain started again, soft at first, then heavier, hammering on the leaves above, soaking through my jacket, chilling me to the bone. My boots sank into the mud, each step more tiring than the last. And that's when I saw it. A faint trail of footprints that weren't mine. They were older, hardened into the dirt, leading deeper into the forest. I should have ignored them, turned back, retraced my path. But something about them pulled me forward. Maybe curiosity, maybe the stubborn part of me that refuses to admit fear. I followed the trail until I noticed a change in the air. The forest became quieter. The usual hum of insects and distant animal cries had stopped. Even the rain felt softer, muted somehow, as if the trees were absorbing it. That's when I saw the old trailhead, barely visible beneath overgrown bushes and twisted roots. It didn't look maintained. It looked abandoned, forgotten, and yet something about it seemed purposeful, like it had been waiting for me. The trail wound into the pines, narrow and uneven. I had to duck under low branches and step over rotting logs. I told myself I was just exploring, but the truth is, fear had already settled into my chest, heavy and cold. Every shadow seemed to move when I wasn't looking. Every sound was amplified. Branches cracking, leaves brushing against one another. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, matching some hidden rhythm of the forest. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed. The trail twisted and the sky was gone now, replaced by an oppressive darkness that felt solid, like it could press down on my shoulders. I began to doubt everything. The path, the trail, my own memory. I started calling out, just to hear my voice, just to remind myself I was real. My voice echoed back, distorted by the trees, a hollow mimicry of my own fear. Then I saw it, the cabin. It wasn't much, just a small wooden structure, barely standing. Its roof sagged, and the windows were dark, black holes staring at me. The door was crooked, hanging slightly off its hinges. Smoke wasn't rising from a chimney. There were no signs of life. And yet, the cabin was alive. Somehow, it pulled me toward it with a weight that I couldn't explain. I walked closer, boots sinking into the mud, fingers brushing wet leaves. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, to forget I had seen it. But I couldn't. I reached the porch, the wood groaning under my weight, and I saw scratches on the doorframe. They were faint, jagged, almost like the claws of some wild animal, or a warning. I traced them with my fingers. They were old, dried into the wood, yet somehow fresh, as if the forest itself had carved them there. Inside, the cabin smelled of rot and damp wood. I didn't turn on my flashlight at first. I just let my eyes adjust. The floor was warped and splintered. The walls were covered in scratches and what looked like faded letters, almost like someone had tried to write something that time had erased. I could feel the air pressing against my skin, dense and heavy. I could hear my own breathing, loud and panicked, mingling with the soft creak of the cabin settling. I wanted to leave, I really did, but the way I had come seemed gone. The forest outside looked different now. Shadows deeper, trees closer, almost watching. Every instinct told me that stepping outside meant being swallowed, lost forever. I was trapped, though I hadn't realized it at the time. The cabin wasn't a refuge. It was a lure, a trap. I spent hours inside that night, pacing, listening. There was a sound coming from the attic, soft and irregular. At first, I told myself it was just the wind, just the house settling. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Footsteps, tiny, careful footsteps, moving back and forth. I couldn't see anything, and I didn't want to look. I stayed in the center of the room, holding my jacket tight, hoping I could convince myself it was nothing. But I knew it wasn't. Morning came, or maybe it didn't. Time lost meaning. The sky beyond the windows lightened just enough for me to make out shapes in the forest. I could see the trees, the path I had tried to follow, but the trail had vanished. There were no footprints, no mud, nothing that marked my passage. The forest had erased me from its memory, just as it had erased everyone else who had wandered too far, too curious. I left the cabin finally, stepping onto the soft, wet ground. I didn't look back, though the feeling of eyes on my back never left. Even now, I think about that night, about the trail, about the cabin, about the way the forest seemed to breathe around me, alive and patient. I can still hear the footsteps in the attic sometimes, in dreams, just faint enough that I question reality. I don't go hiking alone anymore. I don't follow unmarked trails. I don't wander into forests at night. But I can't stop thinking about the cabin, hidden deep in the pines, waiting for someone like me to get lost again. The door wasn't locked. I know that sounds simple, but it was a kind of simple that lodges in your chest and won't let go. I remember standing there on that rotten wooden porch, staring at it. The wood was gray and splintered, swollen from rain and age. Moss clung to the edges, and vines curled around the frame like slow-moving fingers. I should have hesitated. I should have turned around and run back into the forest. But curiosity, or maybe foolish pride, pushed me forward. The first thing I noticed were the symbols. They were carved into the doorframe itself, etched deep into the wood with jagged, uneven lines. I couldn't recognize them, not at first. They didn't look like any alphabet I knew. They weren't letters or numbers. Some resembled spirals. Others looked like scratches, almost like the claws of some unseen creature. My fingers traced them lightly, and I felt a slight vibration under my skin, as if the wood itself had remembered every hand that had touched it before me. The air around the cabin felt thicker, heavier. I remember breathing slowly, trying to steady myself, trying to tell myself this was just a cabin, a dead, old, abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. But I could feel something pressing against the back of my neck, like the forest itself was watching me hesitate. I had a strange, irrational urge to knock, to ask whoever, or whatever, might be inside if they were okay. Then I realized, of course, there was no one. There had never been anyone. I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to echo into the trees, but I was alone. I stepped inside, my boots crunching against the dirt and debris that had accumulated over years of neglect. The floor was warped, with boards bowed and cracked. Dust rose in little clouds around my feet. Everything smelled of rot and wet wood, like the forest that seeped inside and refused to leave. I shone my flashlight across the room. I didn't want to, but I had to. The beam cut through the darkness, catching on furniture that looked like it had been abandoned mid-use. A table in the corner had plates still on it, caked with something dark and crusted over. A chair had toppled onto its side. The fireplace was full of soot and ash, though I couldn't tell if it had been used recently or long ago. Everything was wrong, in a way I couldn't quite name. And then I saw the walls. They were covered in marks, faded, scratched, carved into the wood in a language I didn't understand. Some looked like words. Others looked like faces, twisted and contorted, screaming silently. I pressed my palm against one of the carvings, and my skin pricked. The wood was cold, unnaturally cold, even though the cabin itself was warm with the humid air trapped inside. It was as if the walls were alive, breathing slowly, just out of sight, just out of reach. I started to walk further inside, my heart thumping, each step louder than the last. The cabin had a strange layout. Small, cramped rooms that led to other rooms, doors opening into doors. There was no clear path forward. I felt trapped, even though there were multiple ways I could have left. The light from my flashlight caught on something in the corner of one room. A mirror, dirty and streaked, but reflected me back perfectly. Or at least, I thought it was me. For a moment, I swore the reflection blinked before I did, and my stomach dropped. I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind was playing tricks on me because I was tired, wet, and lost. But the feeling lingered. The air felt alive, almost sentient, responding to my thoughts, to my fear. I moved deeper, following the layout like I'd followed trails in the woods, hoping that each step would lead to an exit or some sign of reason. That's when I noticed the floorboards. Not the warped ones I stepped on before, but a section that seemed wrong. Too smooth, too polished. It reflected the light faintly, but not like a mirror, almost like it was wet, or like it had absorbed the beam instead of reflecting it. I stepped closer and the smell hit me, metallic, coppery, blood. My stomach turned and my legs threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had to know. I had to see. I pushed open another door and entered a small room at the back of the cabin. The ceiling was low, and the walls were covered in more carvings, denser this time. Some looked like warnings. Others were symbols I recognized from books on folklore, symbols associated with protection, with keeping something out. But the pattern was wrong, chaotic. Whoever had made these wasn't trying to protect anything. They were calling something in. I felt my chest tighten, my breath shallow. Then I heard it, a sound, soft, almost like a whisper, not from anywhere in particular, but all around me. I froze, straining to hear, telling myself it was the wind, but the whisper was too precise, too deliberate. I caught a word, or maybe a fragment, something like my name, but not quite. I couldn't tell if I had heard it or imagined it. I forced myself to keep moving. The room had a window, broken and jagged, letting in streaks of moonlight that cut across the walls. And in that light, I saw them. Tiny scratches moving along the walls, shifting when I looked away. It was impossible, but I saw them. Lines forming shapes, shapes forming faces. Faces that stared at me without eyes. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by the certainty that whatever had been here, whatever had been called, was still waiting. Hours passed like minutes. Or maybe minutes passed like hours. I don't remember. I remember tracing the carvings, trying to understand them, try to find some logic, some pattern that would make this cabin less threatening. There was none. Nothing made sense. The walls whispered, the floor groaned, and the shadows shifted just outside the corners of my vision. Every instinct told me to leave. Every rational thought screamed at me. But leaving felt impossible. It was as if the cabin had wrapped its roots around me, holding me, waiting. Finally, I forced myself to the door. I had to leave. I couldn't stay another second. My hands shook as I pushed it open. The porch was wet, slick, and I slipped, landing on my knees. I looked back once before running, and for a brief second, the door closed behind me on its own. I didn't stop until I was back on the main trail, the forest behind me still quiet, too quiet. The cabin had disappeared from sight, almost as if it had never existed. But I knew it had. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, the memory of its walls, the smell of its rot, the symbols carved into the doorframe. They were burned into me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see those symbols. I hear those whispers. I feel the cold of the wood against my palms. I can't explain why, but I know the cabin is still there, somewhere, waiting for the next person to wander in, the next person to open the door that wasn't locked. And I just know, that it's only a matter of time before someone else does. The first night inside the cabin was the kind of night that sticks to your bones, even after the sun rises and the memory fades. I told myself I'd just rest for a while. I was exhausted from hiking, from getting lost, from the constant tension that had tightened in my chest ever since I first saw the cabin. But sleep didn't come easy. Every sound was amplified. Every shadow seemed to shift just out corner of my eye. I could feel the walls watching, breathing, and the forest beyond pressing in like it wanted me to disappear. I had settled on the floor in the main room, using my jacket as a pillow. I tried to convince myself that the footsteps I thought I had heard earlier were just the house settling. Old cabins do that, I told myself. With creaks, floors groan. It's natural, but deep down I didn't believe it. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end, my ears straining for any sound, any signal that I wasn't alone. And then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps from above. The attic. The sound was faint at first, almost drowned out by the wind and the occasional drip of water from the leaky roof. But it was there, unmistakable. Step, pause. Step, pause. They weren't moving quickly, but they were moving with purpose. My heart skipped. I told myself it was impossible. There was no way anyone could be in that cabin. The door had been unlocked, yes, but I had been alone all this time. I had seen no signs of life. And yet, there was a sound. I tried to ignore it at first. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that my mind was twisting the creaks of the old cabin into something else. But I couldn't stop listening. Each step made my chest tighten, my breath catching my throat. Step, pause. Step, pause. I realized I hadn't moved, hadn't even breathed, for minutes. I was frozen in the middle of the room, flashlight forgotten at my side. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. I had to know. I had to see. I told myself it was curiosity, but the truth was pure terror masked as curiosity. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, each step groaning under my weight, each one echoing louder than the last. The sound above me didn't stop. Step, pause. Step, pause. The attic door was old, warped, hanging slightly off its hinges. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pushed it open. The darkness inside was thick, heavier than the rest of the cabin, like it was holding its breath. I could barely see, but my flashlight revealed shapes in the shadows. Old furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly, dust motes drifting like tiny ghosts in the beam of light. And then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. My ears were ringing, my heart hammering. I stood there, holding my breath, listening for any sign that the sound had been real. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound returned. Not from one spot, but all around me. Footsteps pacing in circles, echoing off the walls. I spun slowly, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing, nothing alive. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, tried to calm my racing heart. I told myself I had imagined it. I had to have. But then I heard something else. A soft whisper, just at the edge of hearing. Not words I could understand, just a sound. Almost like a name being called. But not quite. I held still, trying to focus. And the whispering stopped. The attic was empty, silent again, yet the feeling remained. Something had been there. Something had been watching. I remember thinking about the forest outside, how I had been lost, how the trees had seemed alive, almost sentient. That feeling hadn't left me. The cabin, the attic, the whispers, they were extensions of the same thing. The forest hadn't released me. It had led me here. And now it was showing me something I wasn't meant to see. Hours passed. I stayed in the attic, too afraid to move, too afraid to leave. Every sound, the drip of water, the creak of the floor, the wind brushing against the walls, made me jump. I started to notice small things, details that I had ignored before. Dust on the floor shifted slightly, as if something had moved through it. A box that had been upright was now on its side. I could swear I saw shadows flit across the corners of the room, shapes that disappeared when I looked directly at them. I tried to rationalize it. Rodents, the wind, my mind playing tricks. But the truth, the gut deep, all-consuming truth was that I wasn't alone. Something else was in this cabin. Something that moved when I wasn't looking, something that didn't belong to the natural world. And the more I tried to convince myself otherwise, the more certain I became. I remember sitting on the floor, hugging my knees, listening to the silence, when I realized something worse than the footsteps. My own thoughts. They weren't my own anymore, not entirely. Thoughts that weren't mine whispered in my mind, doubts, fears, images I hadn't summoned. Faces I didn't recognize swam at the edges of my vision when I closed my eyes. I began to feel detached from myself, as if I were watching my own terror from a distance, powerless to stop it. And then the footsteps started again, but this time slower, deliberate, right above my head. Step, pause, step, pause. I wanted to run, to leave, but the attic stairs now seemed like a barrier. I was trapped in a circle of fear, the walls closing in. I felt the cabin itself watching me, judging me for being human, for being weak, for being curious enough to enter. I stayed there until my body shook from exhaustion. I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. The attic became a chamber of anticipation, where every sound, every creak, every shifting shadow promised something terrible. I realized then that fear isn't about what you see. It's about what you imagine, what you allow your mind to create in the spaces between. And in that space, in the silence and darkness, the cabin had me exactly where it wanted. By morning, I was a wreck. My arms were scraped from the walls, my knees bruised on the floor, my skin clammy with sweat and cold. I didn't even want to think about leaving, but I knew I had to. I knew I had to escape before the cabin decided to keep me forever. I took a last look around the attic. The shadows seemed thicker in the corners, more defined, almost like they had been waiting for me to notice. I couldn't tell if they were real or if I was losing my mind, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. I descended the stairs slowly, each step in negotiation with my own fear. Step, pause, step, pause. It was a rhythm I had become painfully aware of. The cabin seemed calm now, indifferent, but I knew better. It had all the time in the world. I had to leave while I could still make it. Once I was back in the main room, I noticed details I hadn't seen before. Marks on the floor that weren't mine. Deep scratches on the walls. Faded symbols carved into the wood. I traced one with my finger and shivered. The wood was colder than it should have been. Alive, maybe, or just a memory of all the fear it had absorbed over decades. I pushed the cabin door open and stepped outside. The morning light was weak gray, filtered through thick clouds. The forest was silent, too silent. I looked back, expecting to see the cabin as it had been, waiting for me, but it seemed smaller somehow, almost diminished in the light. Or maybe I had been large in the darkness, inflated by my own fear. I walked away quickly, boots sinking in the mud, heart still racing. I didn't look back again, though the memory of those attic footsteps followed me for miles, haunting me in a way that nothing else has. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. I can still feel the weight of the attic, the air thick and cold, the sense of being watched, being studied. I can still hear the whispers that were never words, but something deeper, something that lives in the mind, in the edges of reality where the forest and the cabin meet. I don't know if I'll ever forget that night. I don't know if I even want to, because remembering it is proof that I survived, proof that I was human, proof that I was alone in the way that matters. But part of me knows I was never truly alone. The cabin felt different after that night in the attic. Somehow smaller, yet heavier. The air hung around me like it had weight, pressing against my chest in a way I couldn't shake. I thought leaving the attic would calm me, that seeing the light of morning would make everything seem less alive. I was wrong. By the time I settled in for what I told myself would be a few hours of rest, the whispering started. At first, I didn't recognize it for what it was. Just a faint murmur, like the wind sneaking through a broken window. But it wasn't outside. It was inside. The walls themselves were speaking, not with words I could understand, but with something older, something patient. I could feel it crawling along the wooden planks, following the grain, pooling in the corners of the room. I tried to ignore it, pressing my hands over my ears, trying to convince myself that it was just a cabin settling, that it was nothing more than my imagination. But the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, layering itself under the sound of my own heartbeat. I began to notice patterns, subtle shifts, pauses that felt like intention. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was communicating a language I didn't know, a rhythm I couldn't translate, but one that made my skin crawl and my stomach twist in knots. I moved through the cabin cautiously, flashlight in hand, shining across the walls as if my eyes could burn away whatever was there. The more I looked, the more I felt like I was being watched. Not just watched, but studied. The marks on the walls seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Faded symbols that had once seemed static now looked alive, like the wood had remembered every hand that had touched it, every footstep that had passed through this space. I remember tracing one of the carvings, a jagged spiral, with my finger. It was cold, sharper than the rest of the wood, almost biting, and as I traced it, I thought I heard a faint whisper echo directly in my mind, not in the air. Something soft, a syllable, repeated over and over. I can't explain how I knew it wasn't real, yet real at the same time. The sound wasn't out there. It was inside me. I started pacing the cabin, trying to convince myself I was sane. I counted the rooms, traced my steps, tried to leave doors open so I could see every corner. But the more I moved, the more I felt like the cabin itself was shifting, rearranging. Walls seemed to stretch, hallways elongated, and corners that had once been empty now appear cluttered with shadows. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that the fear had twisted reality, but part of me knew better. The cabin had a consciousness, subtle and slow, and it was aware of me. The whispers grew in confidence, layering over each other, echoing across the walls. Sometimes they sounded almost human, as if dozens of people were murmuring at once. Sometimes they sounded like trees scraping together, wind rushing through cracks, leaves brushing against glass. I couldn't tell where the sounds came from, or even if they were trying to guide me somewhere or trap me further. My sense of direction became useless. I had no sense of time. I had no sense of place. I tried to distract myself. I looked at the furniture, at the broken table, at the toppled chairs. I tried to catalog everything in my mind, to impose logic, to convince myself it was all just an old cabin, decaying, haunted only by history, by rain, by time. But logic didn't help. I began to notice shapes in the periphery of my vision, shapes that weren't there when I looked directly, faces, blurred and twisted, peering out from the shadows. Sometimes they seemed to watch me from inside the walls themselves, eyes wide and unblinking, mouths open but silent. Paranoia set in quickly. I stopped trusting my own senses. Every sound was amplified, every creak, every sigh of wood, every drop of water falling from the roof sounded like movement just beyond my vision. I began whispering to myself, saying my name, reminding myself that I was alone. But the whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder when I spoke. They seemed to respond to me. I tried to sleep again, curling up on the floor, flashlight dimmed, jacket around my shoulders. I kept my ears pressed to the wood, telling myself that if I could hear the exact rhythm of the whispering, I could understand it, anticipate it, control it. I was wrong. The whispers didn't follow logic. They didn't pause. They didn't rest. They crept along the walls and the corners, through the ceiling beams, as if the cabin itself were breathing around me. By the second night, my mind was fraying. I couldn't distinguish between thought and whisper, memory and suggestion. I started leaving marks on the walls of my fingers, trying to communicate back, to establish a boundary, some understanding. But it was useless. The whispers seemed to mock me. Sometimes they grew silent when I touched the walls. Sometimes they intensified, weaving themselves through my mind, making me see fleeting images, trees bending in impossible angles, shadows folding over themselves, figures that walked backwards or vanished mid-step. I remember one moment distinctly. I was pressed against a corner, trying to convince myself to breathe slowly, when I felt a cold brush against my cheek. I snapped my head around, but nothing was there. I felt the weight of the cabin, the wood pressing against my skin, almost like it had mass, like it had form. My reflection in a dusty window caught my face. Pale, hollow, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. I didn't recognize myself. I had become part of the cabin, one more element in its quiet, patient history of horror. Every instinct told me to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something had tethered me here, deeper than fear, deeper than curiosity. Something old, something deliberate. The cabin was patient. I was not. My thoughts began to fracture. I couldn't remember why I came here. I couldn't remember how I had found the trail. I could only feel the whispers, feel them coil around my mind like ivy, tightening. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice sounded foreign, distant, swallowed by the thick air. My words didn't echo. They disappeared before reaching the walls. I realized then that the whispers weren't just sounds. They were instructions, suggestions, ideas pressing into my mind. They wanted me to notice, to remember, to stay, and part of me obeyed. I started following their rhythm, pacing the rooms, tracing the carvings, murmuring to myself words I didn't understand but felt compelled to speak. By the end of the night, I was exhausted, hollowed. I slumped against the wall, listening to the murmurs, letting them move through me. I was part of the cabin now, or at least I felt like I was. Every breath I took echoed in the corners. Every heartbeat synced with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the wooden walls. Outside, the forest was silent, indifferent. Inside, the cabin whispered, patient, alive. And I knew, deep down, that leaving wasn't about opening the door or stepping onto the porch. Leaving would mean escaping the whispers themselves. I didn't leave. Not yet. Even now, long after I stumble back onto the main trail, the sound lingers. When I'm alone in the dark, I hear it faintly behind my ears in the hollow of my skull. Step, pause, whisper. Step, pause, whisper. The walls are always there, even when they aren't. The cabin is always there, even when I can't see it. And I know, someday, if I wander too far into the forest, I'll hear it again, waiting, patient, whispering. Dawn came slowly, not with the bright warmth I'd hoped for, but with gray, oppressive light that filtered through the thick canopy of pine trees. I thought the morning would bring relief, that sunlight would wash away the fear that had rooted itself deep in my chest. I was wrong. The cabin was behind me, but the forest had not let me go. I stumbled down the narrow trail, boots slick with mud, heart hammering. Every step felt heavy, weighted by the lingering tension from the night in the cabin. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, sharp and cloying in the weak light. I told myself that if I just kept moving, I would get out. The main trail had to be somewhere ahead. It had to lead back to the road, to civilization, to sanity. But the forest had changed. Or maybe I had. My senses were frayed. Every shadow seemed too deliberate, too structured. Branches bent in ways they shouldn't. Gaps between the trees sometimes held shapes that flickered in the corner of my vision. I would look directly at them, and nothing was there. But then, a moment later, they were standing just beyond where the light fell. Human shapes. Maybe. They didn't move like humans. They weren't clear. Just silhouettes. Watching. Waiting. I started whispering to myself, saying my name just to feel my voice, to remind myself that I was still real. But even that didn't work. The shapes didn't leave. Sometimes, I swear, they mirrored me. If I slowed my pace, they slowed. If I sped up, they seemed to sprint without a sound. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation, fear, the cabin's oppressive memory. But no matter how much I reasoned, the forest was alive. I could feel it in every step, every brush of my hand against the wet undergrowth. The trail twisted and turned, unfamiliar now. I had memorized it yesterday, or thought I had, but today it seemed alien. Every turn led me deeper, not out, and the shapes multiplied. Branches cast shadows that seemed longer than they should have been, contorting in impossible angles. When I focused, they looked like people, figures watching me, pressing close to the edges of my perception. I stumbled over a root and fell. Mud covered my hands and knees. I pressed my palms into the soil, tasting it, inhaling it, trying to anchor myself to something real. The shapes didn't react immediately, but then slowly they shifted, and I realized I was surrounded not by a few, but dozens. They didn't step closer. They didn't make a sound. They just were watching, waiting. I scrambled to my feet, hard in my throat, lungs burning. I ran. The path narrowed. The trees crowded me from all sides. My flashlight had died hours ago, and the gray dawn offered little guidance. I ran blindly, branches whipping against my face, scraping my arms, snagging my jacket. The forest seemed to pulse with every step I took, alive and aware of me, marking my panic, feeding on it. I tried calling out, shouting, anything to break the silence, but my voice was weak, swallowed by the trees. Even the wind seemed absent, leaving a hollow stillness that amplified the fear. My legs ached, but I kept running, driven by the need to escape, to reach something, anything that resembled safety. The shapes followed, always just at the edge of vision, always watching, pressing against my peripheral vision, refusing to reveal themselves fully. I remember tripping again, this time tumbling into a shallow gully. Mud and leaves coated me, seeping into my clothes, cold and wet. I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm the pounding of my heart. The shapes lingered above, just at the edge of the trees, stretching, crouching, twisting impossibly. I could feel their gaze, a weight pressing into my skull, shaping my thoughts, my fears, my very perception. I forced myself to stand. Step by step, I moved forward, hand against the rough bark of a tree to steady myself. And that's when I noticed the eyes. Not human eyes, exactly. Not even animal eyes. Just small, glinting points of light, reflecting what little dawn there was. They were everywhere. In the trees, on the ground, perched on broken branches. I knew instinctively they weren't just watching. They were assessing, judging, waiting for me to make a mistake. The forest closed in around me. Every turn seemed to lead to another dead end. Moss-covered rocks, fallen trees, dense underbrush. It was as if the forest itself had rearranged in the night, guiding me into a maze I could not escape. And all the while, the shapes and eyes pressed in from the edges of my vision. I couldn't stop seeing them, couldn't stop feeling them. I started hearing things too, soft, deliberate rustling, like footsteps just behind me, moving with me, keeping pace without ever revealing themselves. I shouted then. I don't remember what I said. My voice was raw, ragged, a thread barely carrying through the oppressive air. I stopped, waiting for a response. Nothing. The forest was silent, but the shapes remained, unmoving, unyielding, patient, watching, waiting. The realization hit me then, and it struck cold. This wasn't just fear. This wasn't hallucination. Something here was alive in a way I couldn't understand. The forest itself had intent, and I had wandered into its hunting ground. Panic surged, wild and untethered. I ran again, branches tearing at my face and arms, mud sucking at my boots. I didn't know how long I ran. I couldn't tell how far. The trees seemed endless, repeating, folding back on themselves. And then, just as suddenly, the shapes were gone. Or maybe I had emerged from their vision. The forest was still oppressive, but the pressing weight eased slightly. My chest still burned, my legs ached, but I was moving. I was alive. I reached a small clearing. The weak light revealed a trail, faint but definite, leading to higher ground. I followed it, stumbling, tripping, driven by the instinct to survive. I didn't look back, didn't dare. The forest was behind me, dense and silent, as if it had paused, waiting for me to falter. I reached a ridge and finally glimpsed something that resembled the horizon, pale and distant. A road, maybe civilization. I ran faster, tears and sweat mixing on my face, mud caking my skin. When I finally reached the road, it was empty, silent, normal. The kind of place that makes you question whether you had imagined everything. But I knew better. I could still feel the eyes of the forest, the lingering weight of the cabin, the memory of the whispers, the footsteps in the attic. They were stitched into me now, and no amount of light or road or open sky could erase them. I don't go back. I don't follow trails that lead into forgotten cabins. I don't wander forests alone. But I can't forget. Sometimes in quiet moments, I see shapes in the corners of my vision, shadows that move against logic, beyond reason. And when I close my eyes, I hear them. Not the whispers from the walls this time, but the forest itself. Patient, watching, waiting, always waiting. Even now, I know it's still there. The cabin, the trail, the shapes among the trees. I know that if I ever return, even by accident, the forest will remember me. It will recognize my scent, my fear, my hesitation, and it will guide me back, step by step, into the heart of its darkness. I try not to think about it. I tell myself I survived, that I escaped. But every time the wind moves through trees in the wrong way, every time a shadow flickers where it shouldn't, I feel it again. That watching, patient presence. The knowledge that the forest is alive, and that I am never truly alone. I learned that night what it means to be hunted without a predator. To feel fear pressed into your bones without a visible threat. The forest is patient. It doesn't need to chase. It only needs to wait. And I, foolish, curious, and lost, stepped right into its embrace. I will never forget. I cannot forget. The shadows and the trees are a part of me now, lingering at the edges of my vision, in the corners of my mind, whispering truths I do not want to hear. And I know, no matter how far I run, no matter how bright the day, they are always there, watching, waiting, patient. The house was smaller than I expected, or maybe the trees were larger. Either way, when we finally arrived, it seemed swallowed by the forest around it. The driveway had long since disappeared under fallen leaves and weeds, and the air smelled of damp earth, moss, and something older, something that had been waiting. My friend handed me the keys, metal cold and heavy in my hand, and for a moment I just stared at the door. It didn't look inviting. It didn't look empty. It looked aware. The windows were the first thing I noticed. Strange scratches lined the glass, jagged and uneven, as if someone or something had tried to claw their way out. But they weren't just random marks. There was a pattern to them, something deliberate enough to make me stop and stare. The scratches weren't deep, but they caught the fading light in a way that made them shimmer, almost like the house was breathing. I remember hesitating at the porch. The wood was gray, rotting at the edges, moss creeping up the posts. I could hear the wind whispering through the trees, rustling the dead leaves on the ground. Even before we turned the keys in the lock, I felt it, a pressure behind my eyes, a tightness in my chest, like the house had already decided whether we belonged or not. The door opened easier than I expected. It swung on hinges that shouldn't have worked after all these years, revealing a darkness that smelled of dust and decay. The smell hit me immediately, thick and musty, like old paper mixed with wet wood. My flashlight barely cut through it. The beam bounced off walls covered in cobwebs and peeling wallpaper. Every surface was coated in dust, so fine it rose in tiny clouds with every step. I wanted to breathe softly to avoid disturbing it, but the air was already filled with the sound of our movement. I stepped inside and immediately felt wrong. Not unsafe, exactly, but wrong. The layout of the house was normal enough, at first glance. A small foyer, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen to the side, but the details were off. Doors that should have opened easily were stiff, floorboards grown like old bones, and the scratches weren't just on the windows. They were everywhere, along the walls, on the doors, carved into the wooden frames as if the house itself had been trying to communicate or maybe warn. My friend was quiet, too. Neither of us spoke much, not because we didn't want to, but because the house seemed to absorb our voices. I wanted to tell him I felt watched, but the words felt fragile, like they'd shatter in the stale air. Every creak, every settling noise seemed exaggerated, magnified in the silence. And every time I moved, it felt as if the shadows around me shifted just slightly, as if they were aware of my presence. I remember moving toward the living room. A thick layer of dust covered the floor. Footprints from decades ago, or maybe yesterday, were pressed faintly into it. Chairs were tipped over. The fireplace cold, the mantel lined with broken, unidentifiable objects. I ran my fingers along the wall and felt the scratches again, deeper this time, more defined, jagged lines that seemed to pulse slightly under my touch. The thought hit me then, sharp and sudden. Someone had been here recently, or something had been. We explored the kitchen next. The sink was full of dust. The counters cracked and warped with age. A single cabinet door hung open, creaking slightly with the movement of air, though the windows were all shut. I felt a shiver, the kind that starts at your spine and spreads like ice. I remember glancing at my friend, seeing his hesitation mirrored in his eyes. We hadn't even spoken a word, but we both knew it. This house wasn't just abandoned. It was occupied by something we couldn't see. As I moved through the house, I began noticing the details I had missed at first glance. Marks in the corners, small scratches that looked like fingers had tried to claw through the walls. Dust disturbed in patterns that suggested movement, though the house had been empty for decades. Every step I took felt measured, as if the floor itself was testing me. And when I reached the stairwell to the upper floor, I hesitated. I didn't know why. I could feel something waiting at the top, patient, silent, watching. The staircase was narrow, the steps warped and uneven. My flashlight flickered slightly, and for a moment I swore I saw a shadow move at the edge of the beam. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but my chest tightened anyway. Step by step, I climbed, each creak of the wood echoing through the silence. At the landing, the hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors. Each one bore the same strange scratches, jagged and purposeful. I reached out and pressed my hand against the nearest doorframe. The wood was cold, almost alive beneath my palm. I could feel the grain vibrating slightly, as if the house itself exhaled when I touched it. I moved down the hallway slowly, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air felt heavier here, thicker, like it had weight. Every breath I drew seemed labored. The smell of dust and decay grew stronger, mixed with a faint metallic tang I couldn't identify. And then I heard it. A faint scratching sound, soft, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a rat, not a loose piece of wood. It was intentional. Someone or something was moving inside these walls. I froze, straining to hear. The sound stopped as abruptly as it started. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, a steady drum against the oppressive quiet. I wanted to leave, to step back into the cold morning air outside, but the house seemed to close in on me, holding me in place. It was patient. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. I was already trapped by my own fear. I remember opening one of the doors at the end of the hall. The room inside was small, maybe a bedroom. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight. The floor was littered with broken objects, shattered picture frames, cracked books, a chair turned upside down. But it wasn't the disarray that made my skin crawl. It was the walls. Scratches again, deeper, forming symbols I couldn't recognize. Some looked like letters, some like shapes, and some like faces. Faces pressed into the wood, mouths open in silent screams. I traced one with my finger, and the chill that shot through me felt like the house had reached inside me. I backed out of the room slowly, almost reverently. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching farther than it had before. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, always just out of reach. The scratches on the walls seemed to multiply, deeper and more defined the longer I stared. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, the memories of everyone who had ever been here, or maybe everything, and I realized with jolt that the house didn't just hold objects or dust. It held fear. It held attention. It held something alive, patient, and waiting. By the time we finished exploring the main floor, the sun had risen a little higher, casting weak light through the grimy windows. The house looked less ominous in the daylight, but the feeling didn't leave. It was there in every corner, every scratch, every layer of dust that moved when we moved. We didn't speak much on the way out, not because we were polite, but because words felt pointless. The house had already communicated what it needed to. I had seen enough, felt enough. I locked the door behind us, though I wasn't sure why. The keys felt heavier in my pocket on the way back to the car. I could still see the scratches on the windows from where I stood, glinting faintly in the sun. They weren't random. They never were. And I knew, deep down, that the house would wait. It would always wait for the next person curious enough or foolish enough to turn its keys and step inside. Even now, I can't shake the memory. The smell of dust, the cold of the wood, the weight of those jagged scratches. I can feel the house in my chest sometimes, small and patient, like it's still watching, still aware, still alive. I tell myself I escaped. I tell myself it's over. But I know better. The house is waiting, and I fear I'll never truly leave behind. It started the night we moved in. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums until you can hear your own heartbeat like a drum. My younger sister, Emma, was the first to notice it. She came to my room, eyes wide and trembling. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I frowned, listening, but all I could hear was the usual settling of the house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind through cracks and windows. "It's nothing," I said, though my own voice sounded strange in the dark. "Just the house settling. That's all." But I didn't believe it. Not entirely. There was a rhythm to the sound she was hearing, a faint tapping like someone or something was walking carefully, deliberately. I could hear it faintly, a soft shuffle that seemed to echo from the floor below. I froze, straining to make sense of it. Our parents had unpacked most of the boxes. The furniture was in place, and yet this noise, it didn't fit. It wasn't until the next day that we found it. We had been exploring the house, poking our heads into every room, pretending the cardboard boxes and dusty furniture were hiding monsters. The basement door was at the far end of the hallway, tucked behind a stack of boxes that our parents had moved aside when they were cleaning. It was small, nondescript, painted the same faded white as the walls. I had walked past it dozens of times without noticing it. Emma stopped abruptly in front of the door, staring at it as if it were some living thing. "It's coming from in there," she said softly, her voice shaking. I frowned and crouched beside her, pressing my ear against the cold wood. The tapping was faint but real. Step, pause, step, pause, like soft fingers walking across the concrete floor beneath. I could feel it vibrating through the door, through the walls, through the soles of my shoes. "Maybe it's the pipes," I suggested, trying to calm both myself and her. But something in the sound told me it wasn't plumbing. Pipes rattle, yes, but they don't pause and step. Pipes don't have intention. Our parents didn't seem to notice the door at all. They passed by it every day, moving boxes and furniture, never mentioning it. It was as if the house itself was keeping a secret, and we were the first to notice. The more we pressed, the heavier the feeling became, like the door was a barrier not just to the basement, but as something the house wanted to keep hidden. That night, we couldn't sleep. The tapping returned, stronger now, louder in the silence of the house. We huddled in the same room, whispering to each other, trying to make sense of it. Step, pause, step, pause. Every time it happened, my stomach twisted. It wasn't frightening in a sudden, jump scare way. It was the kind of fear that creeps under your skin, settles in your bones, and refuses to leave. I tried to ignore it, lying under my blanket with my eyes squeezed shut, but I couldn't. The tapping was patient, waiting for me to acknowledge it. Step, pause, step, pause. I could feel my heartbeat sync with it, slow and deliberate, until I felt trapped between my own pulse and the sound on the other side of the door. By morning, we were exhausted, pale and jittery. I told our parents again, but they brushed it off with tired smiles and distracted answers. "Basements make noises," our father said. "Old houses do that. Stop worrying." But he didn't go down there. None of them ever did. That afternoon, Emma and I decided to investigate. We waited until our parents were out in the yard, pretending to water the garden, and then we moved the boxes away from the door. The scratches started then, faint at first, almost invisible, etched into the wood around the frame. Thin, jagged lines that caught the light in a way that made them glimmer. We hadn't seen them before. How could we have? The door had been closed for years, untouched. I pressed my hand to the scratches, and a chill ran through me, A sensation like the house was watching my fingers. Step, pause, step, pause. The tapping was louder now, closer, as if it were anticipating our actions. Emma gasped, clutching my arm. It's alive, she whispered. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, but the sensation of the house listening, waiting, was undeniable. We looked at each other, hesitant, drawn to the door yet terrified of what lay beyond. I tried the knob. Locked. Of course it was locked. It had to be, but it was the kind of lock that felt old, brittle, as if it had been put in place to keep something in rather than out. I felt a sudden pressure behind the door, subtle but unrelenting, like something on the other side knew we were there, and it didn't want us to leave. We debated what to do. Emma wanted to tell our parents. I wanted to leave it alone, but the sound, the tapping, was persistent. Step, pause, step, pause. It had rhythm now, like a heartbeat or a warning. It responded to our presence, louder when we pressed closer, softer when we backed away. It was patient, deliberate, and aware. That evening, curiosity won. I found a small hammer in the garage. Emma followed, trembling, whispering apologies to the house as if it could hear us. I knelt in front of the door, hammer in hand, and struck the lock. It resisted at first, old and stubborn, but eventually gave way. The door swung open slowly, groaning on its hinges. The basement was dark, thicker darkness than anywhere else in the house, like it absorbed the light. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by the weak beam of our flashlight, and the smell hit us immediately. Wet earth, something metallic, something wrong. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of it press into my chest. The tapping stopped the moment we stepped inside. Silence swallowed us. The house seemed to hold its breath. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the shadows, we heard it again. Step, pause, step, pause. But this time it was closer, closer than it had any right to be. Considering the basement was empty, Emma whimpered, hiding behind me. I tried to shine the flashlight across the room. Shelves lined the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs. Boxes stacked haphazardly, contents rotting or crumbling. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and yet the tapping continued. Step, pause, step, pause. It echoed in the concrete in the walls, in the air itself. We explored slowly, every step deliberate. I tried to rationalize it. Rodents? Pipes? Loose floorboards? But the sound didn't make sense. It had pattern, purpose, intention. Sometimes it moved closer when we approached certain boxes, then receded when we tried to inspect, like it was guiding us or warning us. I remember reaching one corner of the basement where the air felt heavier, thicker, almost solid. The tapping was louder here. Step, pause, step, pause. I shined the flashlight and froze. There were scratches here too. Deep, long, jagged lines etched into the concrete wall, curling in patterns I couldn't understand. Symbols, maybe, or faces. I pressed my hand against one of the marks, and the chill that shot through me was immediate and overwhelming, like the house had reached inside me. Emma started crying quietly. I don't like it, she whispered. It's not normal. I swallowed, trying to hold back my own fear. I wanted to believe it was just an old house, haunted only by memory. But I knew better. The tapping wasn't history. It wasn't a sound left behind. It was alive, watching, waiting. We didn't stay long. We ran back upstairs, slammed the basement door, and locked it again. Step, pause, step, pause. I could still hear it faintly, pressing against the door, patient, deliberate. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. The scratches around the frame glimmered in the dim light. The house was quiet now, but the memory of the tapping of the way to the basement pressed against me long after we left the room. Even now, I can't shake it. Sometimes, at night, I hear faint tapping in my dreams, echoing from some dark, distant basement. Step, pause, step, pause. The sound lives in me, a pulse that won't stop, a reminder that curiosity has consequences. The basement door is still locked in my mind, even if I've never been back. And I know, if we ever unlock it again, Whatever waits beneath will remember us. Step, pause, step, pause. Waiting. The night was heavier than usual, thick and silent in a way that made every little sound impossible to ignore. I was lying in bed, pretending to read, but my eyes kept drifting toward the hallway outside my door. There had been whispers before, soft noises in the corners of the house. But tonight it felt different. The air was colder, somehow sharper, as if it had edges, slicing against my skin through the thin sheets. It started with a door slam. The first one made my heart jump so hard, I thought it would crack my ribs. My parents' bedroom was down the hall, and they were both asleep. The sound wasn't soft. It was deliberate, sharp, echoing against the walls, shaking loose dust from the old ceiling. I froze, my hand gripping the book, listening. Nothing moved after that, except the faint groan of the house settling. I told myself it was the wind, that old houses like this always creak and slam. But the air was still. The curtains barely stirred. And then it happened again, a second slam, from the kitchen this time, distant but unmistakable. My pulse surged. I sat up, listening carefully. The house was breathing around me. Waiting, I got out of bed slowly, bare feet pressing against the cold wood floor. The air smelled damp, like the house had trapped winter inside, unwilling to let it go. I took the flashlight from the nightstand and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the dark hallway. Shadows clung to the corners like thick velvet. I stepped forward carefully. Every floorboard groaned under me. The hallway was empty. I checked each door. My parents were asleep. The rooms were empty. And yet, the cold remained. A draft, unnatural. Slid along the floor, up the walls, brushing the back of my neck like invisible fingers. I could see my breath in the faint light. How could it be this cold inside the house? The heat had been on, radiators humming quietly, and yet the air was icy. I walked toward the kitchen, flashlight steady in my hand. The second slam had come from here. The kitchen smelled of old wood, dust, and something metallic faintly lingering, like blood I hadn't noticed before. Every chair was in place. The counters clear. Nothing had moved. And yet, I could feel it. I could feel the presence of something in the room, something waiting just beyond the light. A third slam erupted, closer this time, from the basement door. I froze. My stomach twisted. That door had been locked for as long as I could remember. My parents had never even mentioned it. The sound rattled through the house, vibrating the walls, the floor, the very air I was breathing. Step, pause. Step, pause. It felt deliberate, intentional, not random. Something down there wanted my attention or wanted me to leave. I couldn't decide if I should run or investigate. Curiosity and fear tangled inside me like barbed wire. I took a few steps toward the door. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost began to form on the edges of the wooden panels. Tiny crystals forming almost instantly. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass of a small window set into the door, and for a moment it didn't look like me. My eyes were wider than usual, dark circles exaggerated, lips pale, and my breath came out in long, uneven clouds. The slamming didn't stop. Doors throughout the house, ones I had checked earlier, began to slam on their own. Step, pause. Step, pause. The sound was rhythmical now, like a song I didn't want to hear, but that I couldn't ignore. Each slam echoed with a kind of intelligence, as if the house itself was alive, testing me, observing me, mocking me. I backed away slowly, flashlight trembling. The draft followed me down the hall, brushing against my arms, whispering along my skin. It smelled faintly of decay, of damp earth, and something I couldn't name. I told myself it was imagination. That fear always makes the mind invent threats. But the cold was real. My hands shook uncontrollably. I could see the edges of my breath forming, swirling in the icy drafts that seemed to have no source. And then I heard it, soft at first, almost inaudible, a whispering, low and breathy, curling around the walls. I couldn't understand the words, but it felt like communication. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm of the doors and the whispers matched. My chest tightened. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run outside into the dawn, anywhere but here, but my feet remained rooted. I couldn't tear myself away. I edged closer to the living room. The biggest slam yet made me jump back, almost dropping the flashlight. The front door rattled violently in its frame. Windows shuddered. It was as if the house was shaking itself awake, testing my courage, watching my reactions, learning. And I could feel it learning. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every flicker of fear was cataloged, absorbed, stored. I reached the living room finally, flashlight sweeping over the furniture. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by the drafts. I could see scratches on the floorboards that hadn't been there before. Small, deliberate marks leading toward the staircase. Step, pause. Step, pause. It was guiding me somewhere, or warning me not to follow. The whispers grew louder. I could feel them vibrating against my eardrums, pressing into my skull, crawling along the bones behind my eyes. It wasn't just sound. It was intention. Something in the house wanted me to understand it, or wanted me to fear it, perhaps both. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my throat was tight, voice swallowed by the weight of the air. The staircase loomed before me. The top of it was dark, unlit, a tunnel of shadow leading to the bedrooms. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm from the doors below seemed to echo up the stairs, guiding me, warning me. Every time I considered retreating, the draft intensified, brushing against my back like a cold hand, nudging me forward. I remember pausing at the top, flashlight trembling in my hand. The hallway stretched before me, doors closed, shadows clinging to the corners. And then, without warning, one of the bedroom doors slammed open violently. Step, pause. Step, pause. I froze, heart hammering. The room beyond was dark, but the air inside seemed even colder, heavier. I could see my breath swirl, white and ghostly, curling up into the darkness. I wanted to retreat, to flee down the stairs, but the hallway seemed to stretch, pulling me forward. Step, pause. Step, pause. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was direction, guidance, insistence. I stepped cautiously toward the open door, flashlight shaking, air sharp in my lungs. The whispers followed, curling around my ears, tugging at my mind, pressing suggestions I didn't want to obey. Inside the room, nothing appeared alive. Furniture coated in dust, a cracked mirror reflecting the flashlight's beam, boxes stacked haphazardly, but the air was thick, heavy, almost liquid with presence. Step, pause. Step, pause. I could feel it behind me, moving along the walls, through the floor, pressing against my spine, eyes unseen but attentive. I backed away, turning toward the hallway, when another door slammed behind me, one I hadn't even approached. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm followed me, patient and unyielding, echoing off the walls and floorboards. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to escape, to leave the house entirely. But the fear was magnetic, rooted in the floorboards, the walls, the air itself. I spent the rest of the night in my room, flashlight clutched, ears straining. Doors continued to slam. Drafts swept through the hallways. Step, pause. Step, pause. Sometimes, when the house fell quiet for just a moment, I thought I heard breathing, soft, deliberate, just beyond my door. It wasn't human. Not really. It was older, patient, watching, waiting. By morning, the house seemed calm again. Doors hung in place. The drafts faded. The whispers gone. My parents never noticed anything, of course. They called me silly, imaginative, tired. But I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had felt. The night visitors were patient. They didn't need to chase. They only needed to make me aware that the house wasn't empty, that it never had been. Even now, I can't forget that night. Sometimes, in the silence of my own home, I hear it again. Step, pause. Step, pause. Faint, echoing. A reminder that some houses are never truly empty, that some doors once opened or slammed never really close, and that whatever walks in the shadows of that old house, whoever or whatever it may be, it remembers, It waits, patient, watching. It started quietly, with a feeling rather than a sound. I was sitting in the living room one late afternoon, the sun low and orange through the dusty windows, and I noticed the shadows first. They were vague, at the edges of my vision, flickering across the glass like the memory of movement rather than movement itself. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the sun, or maybe the trees outside playing tricks on me. But then I saw the shapes again, clearer this time, and my blood ran cold. Faces pressed against the windows. Not human, at least not entirely, though they had the outline of a person. Pale, blurry, as if the glass itself had somehow trapped a reflection of something that didn't belong in the world. I froze, heart hammering, staring at the nearest window. I could see eyes, dark, hollow eyes that seemed to study me. But the moment I blinked, or moved even slightly, they vanished, just gone, leaving the reflection of the living room behind, as if nothing had ever been there. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light. Shadows distort at certain angles. Reflections play games in old glass. But I couldn't shake the feeling that these were not accidents, not optical illusions. They were deliberate, and they were aware of me. I kept seeing them that evening, one after another. At first, I caught them out of the corner of my eye, the way they lingered in the windows, waiting like something crouched just beyond the surface. I would turn suddenly, flashlight or not, and nothing would be there. The panes were empty, glass intact, nothing pressing from outside or inside. And yet, I could feel their gaze, cold and patient, weighing on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house breathing around me, counting the seconds, straining for any sound that might give away their presence. Every few minutes, I thought I saw one, a pale face against the living room window across the hall. Step, pause, step, pause. But when I focused, the face melted into shadows, and only the reflection of my lamp remained. I started checking the windows methodically, one by one, peering through the glass into the yard and beyond. Nothing, just the garden, the trees, the wind brushing against the grass. But when I returned to the living room, there it was again. Same vague shape, same hollow eyes. I swear it was watching me, waiting for me to notice, testing me, seeing if I was brave or foolish enough to approach. The more I saw them, the more I realized they weren't confined to one window. Faces appeared in the kitchen, in the hall, even upstairs. Each one seemed unique but connected, as a part of family or group bound by the house, by some unknown purpose. And always, the moment I moved toward them, they vanished. Step forward, gone. Step back, reappear. It was a game, a cruel, patient game. I tried telling my parents, but they dismissed it immediately. Shadows, my father said. Old houses play tricks on the eyes. Don't be ridiculous. My mother gave me the same tired look, like I was imagining things, overreacting. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the shapes were not illusions. They were alive in some way, aware, deliberate. I spent the next day pacing the rooms, testing the pattern. Whenever I approached a window, the face vanished. When I stepped back, it returned. I noticed the eyes followed me, even when my back was turned. They didn't blink. They didn't move independently. They just watched, silent and still, patient as stone. There was a rhythm to them, a pulse that matched something deep in my chest, like they were sinking to my heartbeat, learning it, cataloging my fear. By evening, I began to feel in my skin. The air seemed colder near the windows, a faint draft that brushed my arms and neck, carrying a subtle metallic tang I couldn't place. The house smelled faintly of decay, of old wood and earth, and the shadows seemed heavier near those spots. I couldn't explain it, not rationally. I only knew that when the faces appeared, I felt the weight of them pressing into me, shaping my thoughts, twisting the edges of reality just slightly enough to make me doubt everything. I decided to test one, though I hated myself for it. I moved slowly, deliberately, toward the living room window. My hands shook. My flashlight had died, so I had only the fading light of dusk to guide me. The face was there, pale and indistinct, eyes dark and unblinking. Step by step, I approached. Step, pause, step, pause. And at the last moment, when my hand reached toward the glass, it vanished. Just like that. Gone. The room reflected only itself. My own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and trembling. I stumbled back, heart racing, trying to convince myself it didn't matter, that the house was old, that shadows behaved strangely. But deep down, I knew better. I had touched something that wasn't meant to be touched, seen something that wasn't meant to be seen. And now it was aware of me. Not aware in the way a person notices another. Aware in a way that mattered. That weighed my actions and waited for my next mistake. That night, the faces didn't just stay in the windows. I began to see them in reflections. In the mirrors of the hallway, the polished surface of the kitchen counter, even the black screen of the turned-off television. Always watching, always patient, always just out of reach, just beyond comprehension. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm haunted me, a pulse that matched my own heartbeat, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but always insistent. Sleep became impossible. I lay in bed, flashlight clutched, staring at the darkened windows across the room. I tried to tell myself it was only imagination, only shadows, but I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were on me at all times. That weight, pressing, patient. I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that the house was teaching me, testing me, preparing me, or punishing me. I didn't know which. The next morning, I approached the windows again, desperate for answers. The faces appeared as always, pale and indistinct. But this time one lingered longer. I froze, unsure whether to approach or run. Its gaze felt heavier than before, focused, almost intelligent. And for the first time, it seemed to move in a way that wasn't tied to my steps. It shifted slightly, tilting its head as if curious, observing. The chill in the air deepened, cross-forming faintly along the edges of the panes, and I had the sickening realization that the house, the shadows, were alive in ways I couldn't understand. I stepped back and the face vanished. My chest burned, my palms sweated. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow, echoing in the empty rooms. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm persisted deeper now, as if the house itself had taken over my pulse. I left the room, but the sense of being watched didn't leave. The windows seemed to reflect movement even when empty, and the shadows lingered in the corners, stretching, waiting. By evening, I had stopped approaching the windows. The faces would appear, always in periphery, always just out of reach. I stopped speaking about it to anyone, afraid of being dismissed or worse, ignored. I stayed close to the interior of the house, away from the glass, avoiding the windows at all costs. But it didn't matter. Even in the center of the room, I could feel the pressure, the silent observation, the patient weight of eyes that didn't blink. I know now that the house was alive, and the faces were its messengers, its watchers. I will never understand what they wanted. Perhaps they were warnings. Perhaps they were memories. Perhaps they were hungry. But I do know that curiosity has a price, and the windows were my lesson. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm haunts me still, a pulse at the edge of my vision, a whisper in the corners of my mind. Even now, in places far from that house, I sometimes see faces in glass or reflection. They are pale, indistinct, hollow-eyed, and every time I feel the same pressure, the same patient awareness, the same rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. Always waiting, always watching, always patient. The faces in the windows are part of me now, etched into memory, refusing to leave. We left before dawn. I remember that clearly. The air was still dark and heavy, and the house loomed behind us like a shadow that had grown too large for its own walls. My parents had decided, almost wordlessly, that we wouldn't stay another night. The strange noises, the slamming doors, the cold drafts, and the faces in the windows, they had worn us down. Fear had settled into our bones, quiet and unrelenting, and we could no longer pretend that it was safe, that it was ordinary. I packed our last few things in silence. Emma was pale, gripping my hand tightly, refusing to speak. Every creak of the floorboard seemed louder than before, echoing through the house like it was mourning our departure. I tried to convince myself we were just being cautious. That it was fear, yes, but fear would fade once we left. I was wrong. I knew it even then. Leaving the house didn't mean leaving it behind. As we loaded the car, I couldn't resist looking back. The windows glimmered in the weak morning light, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw one of the pale faces watching us from the living room window. But the second I blinked, it vanished. Just glass. Just reflection. My chest tightened. That house had followed us with its presence, lingering in our minds even as we drove away. The road felt endless. We didn't speak much, each of us lost in our thoughts. Emma kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, expecting to see the house growing smaller in the distance. Or worse, expectant. I could feel the same dread pressing down on me. A slow, steady ache that seemed to seep into my blood. That house had a memory, and it had put some part of itself into us. Weeks later, I couldn't shake the sense of being followed, even in daylight. I avoided mirrors at first, afraid of catching a glimpse of those pale faces again. Every window reflected more than just the world outside. It reflected possibility, memory, and the sense that something unseen was always aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm haunted me, embedded itself in my heartbeat. I hated the house, but I feared forgetting it even more. Then we learned the truth. It wasn't just our fear or our imagination or the house playing tricks. A neighbor, older and hesitant, told us about the previous family. They had lived there before us. For years, apparently. Friends, neighbors, strangers, all had known them. And then one day they were gone, disappeared without a trace. The house had remained, still empty, silent, waiting. Nothing indicated why they left. Nothing explained where they went. The house kept its secrets. I felt the blood drain from my face when I heard that. Everything I had experienced, every slam, every whisper, every shadow in the windows, took on new meaning. Those weren't just coincidences. The house had claimed them before, and we had only barely escaped. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth, and I struggled to breathe as I remembered the cold drafts, the watching faces, the rhythm that followed us step by step, night after night. I thought about the tapping from the basement, the cold that pressed against our skin, the whispers that curled along the walls. Had they resisted, or had they been unable to? Were those shadows in the windows some form of warning? Or the first hint of a fate too terrible to imagine? I tried not to dwell on it, but the house was clever, patient. It didn't just frighten. It embedded itself in your memory, in your senses, until you could no longer tell where reality ended and its influence began. Emma asked me sometimes, weeks later, if she dreamed of it too. She still woke up in the middle of the night, pale and trembling, whispering about windows and shadows. I didn't tell her that I had seen the same faces in my own reflections, in the windows of other houses, sometimes even in the darkened glass of my bedroom. Step, pause. Step, pause. Always that rhythm. Always the watching. The house had followed us, not physically, but through memory, through fear, through something stronger and more enduring than walls or locks. Our parents tried to convince us to forget it, to move on. It was just an old house, they said. Old houses have noises. That's all. But they had felt it too, even if they wouldn't admit it. I could see it in their eyes, the shadows behind their calm expressions, the hesitation when they passed old photographs, the slight tightening of their chests when we drove past houses that reminded us of ours. The house lingered, a silent predator in our memories. I began to notice things about myself that scare me more than any shadow ever could. I flinched at the slightest creak in floorboard. I checked windows obsessively, even in the safety of our new home. I woke up to cold drafts, even in rooms with no open windows. And sometimes when the light was just right, I swore I could see a pale face at the edge of my vision, watching, waiting, patient. Step, pause. Step, pause. My heartbeat and the rhythm had merged into one. One night, I dreamed of the house, or rather, it dreamed through me. I walked the halls again, flashlight in hand, shadows stretching, faces appearing and vanishing, doors slamming in sync with my heartbeat. I could hear whispers of the previous family, soft, broken, afraid. I ran down the hallways, but the house was endless, walls extending far beyond their actual dimensions. And then I woke, drenched in sweat, the pulse still echoing in my ears, the memory of cold and weight and watching pressing into me like it had never left. I think that is the worst part. Not the fear, not the shadows, not the knowledge that others vanish here. It's that the house doesn't leave you. It doesn't need to. It can plant itself in your memory, in your perceptions, and let its influence grow quietly, patiently. Step, pause. Step, pause. Every thought, every dream, every reflection is a reminder. Every reflection is a warning. Even now, months later, I sometimes drive past old houses in quiet neighborhoods, and I feel it. The same pressure, the same patient awareness. I don't know if it is the same house, or if it doesn't matter. Perhaps there is only the memory, and the memory is the house itself. I have learned to avoid windows in empty rooms, mirrors in the dark. I try not to dwell on it, but every now and then, when the wind is just right and the air smells faintly of dust and damp wood, I feel it again. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm that follows me, the watching that doesn't stop, the patient memory of a house that will never release what it has touched. The story of the previous occupants haunts me more than any shadow or whisper ever could. They disappeared silently, leaving only questions. And though we escaped, we carry pieces of it still, etched into our memories, embedded into the edges of our perception. We are survivors, but survivors do not forget. Survivors remember, and the house does too. Step, pause. Step, pause. Always waiting, always patient. I will never forget that house. I will never forget the cold drafts, the slamming doors, the whispers in the walls, the pale faces at the windows. And I will never forget the lesson it taught us. Curiosity is a doorway, and doors, once opened or noticed, never truly close. Memory is the house now, and we are trapped within it, running, forever running, but never truly free. Even if I live a lifetime away, in a place sunlit and warm, I know I carry the house inside me. Its rhythm echoes through my chest, a quiet, relentless pulse. I hear it sometimes in my dreams, sometimes in the corners of darkened rooms. Step, pause. Step, pause. It is patient. It is waiting. It is watching. And it will not let me or anyone forget. I have been a ranger in these woods for a little over 5 years, and I thought I knew every trail, every creek, every clearing. I knew the way the sun hit the pines in the morning, the places where the snow melted first, even the old spots where hunters left their fires burning too long. I like to think the forest held no secrets from me. But that day, I realized I had been wrong. It was late afternoon when I spotted it. I was on patrol, walking a narrow trail that curved along the edge of a ridge. The wind was sharp, slicing through the trees with a hiss, and the smell of wet earth and pine was strong after the morning rain. I paused to check my map and my GPS, something I rarely did on familiar trails. When a movement caught my eye, it was a cabin, small, weathered, almost swallowed by the pines. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and checked the map again. Nothing. No trail, no road, no marker. It wasn't supposed to be there, not according to any official records. And yet, there it was, partially hidden by thick underbrush, its wooden walls gray and worn, roof sagging slightly in the center, like it had carried too much weight for too long. I should have felt relief. Something man-made in the wilderness is familiar, safe, a sign of life, but instead, a chill ran down my spine. Something about the cabin felt wrong. It wasn't just the way it seemed out of place. It was the silence around it. No smoke from a chimney. No smoke of any kind. No movement. Just the house, standing in the middle of the trees, as though it had always been there, waiting. I approached cautiously, rifle slung over my shoulder. Each step crunching over the wet pine needles sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet. The closer I got, the more details emerged. The wood was cracked and warped, water stains running down the sides. The door sagged on its hinges. Windows were dark, clouded with dirt and age. There were no signs of recent fire, no footprints in the mud leading to or from it. Nothing suggested life. And yet, the forest seemed to bend around it, quieting the wind, stilling the animals, as if it had claimed the space entirely. I checked the door. Locked, old, rusted. I pressed my hand against the frame. It was cold, colder than it should have been for late afternoon sun. The wind seemed to whisper past me then, curling through the trees, carrying a faint, metallic tang I couldn't place. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a hunter's cabin long abandoned. Maybe someone had built it illegally and moved on. That's all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the treeline, but there was nothing. Birds had stopped singing. A squirrel froze mid-climb up a tree. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That's when I noticed the carvings. Faint, almost invisible at first, etched into the door frame. Symbols, patterns, letters maybe. My memory isn't clear, but they were deliberate. They were old, jagged, and worn by time, but the intention behind them was unmistakable. Someone, or something, had wanted to mark this place. I circled the cabin, flashlight now in hand, even though there was still enough light. Around the back, the ground sloped into a shallow depression. Mud churned and packed down as though someone had dragged something heavy. I crouched, examining it. Footprints? Drag marks? The rain had blurred everything, making it difficult to tell, but the marks led to the edge of the woods, then disappeared into the dense underbrush, as if whatever had been here left without wanting to be followed. I took a step back, and the hairs on my neck prickled. The forest around me felt too still, too controlled. I've been in storms. I've been in bare country. I've walked in silence, so heavy it presses on your lungs. But this was different. The air felt thick, almost viscous. I could hear my own pulse, the scrape of my boots on the ground, the creak of branches overhead, and then, almost imperceptibly, a sound behind the cabin. I froze. Something shifted among the trees, low to the ground, deliberate. My mind leapt to a bear, a coyote, even another person, but the shape was too thin, too upright, too careful. I raised my flashlight, scanning back and forth. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and a strange quiet. The sound didn't repeat. It was a single movement, like something had slipped through the woods and waited. I should have left then. Any rational thought would have told me to mark the location, report it, and move on. But curiosity, professional curiosity, perhaps, or something darker, kept me there. I stepped closer to the cabin again. The carvings on the doorframe were clearer now in the fading light, and I traced them with my fingers. They weren't random. Lines intersected with angles that didn't make sense. Circles nested within each other. Letters, maybe, or symbols older than I could name. A sense of history pressed against me, as though this cabin had existed outside of time, untouched by the maps and roads and records I trusted. A sudden gust of wind rattled the door. I jumped, flashlight swinging, heart hammering. The door shivered as though something inside it had moved, or wanted to move. My rational mind told me it was the wind. I tried to convince myself of that, but the chill that crept down my spine wasn't from the air. It was from awareness, from knowing that whatever had carved those marks, whatever had built this cabin, was not gone entirely. It lingered, somehow, patiently. I backed away slowly, turning my gaze back toward the trail I had walked. And that's when I noticed something else. Figures in the shadows beyond the trees. Just shapes, vague, indistinct. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Shadows cast by the branches and the sinking sun. But they didn't move like shadows. They didn't shift naturally. They waited. Step, pause. Step, pause. Not sound, not actual motion, just a sense of intent. Watching, waiting. I exhaled sharply, heart hammering in my ears. I had seen a lot in these woods. Hunted animals, lost campers, evidence of people living illegally in backcountry. But nothing like this. Nothing that made the forest feel so conscious, alive in a way that wasn't natural. I felt eyes on me from every angle, though I knew there was no one there. I could feel it, patient and deliberate, pressing against the edges of perception. I turned and started back toward the trail, try and put distance between me and the cabin. My hand itched to mark it on my GPS, take photos, anything, but every instinct told me not to, as though the cabin itself had rules I didn't understand. It existed, somehow, outside of the forest. I thought I knew. I moved quickly now, crunching pine needles underfoot, checking over my shoulder constantly. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm of the shadows seemed to follow me, faint but undeniable. Once I was back on the main trail, I paused, trying to gather my thoughts. I made mental notes, cataloged the details. Location approximate, cabin small and worn, doors sagging, windows dark, carvings on the frame. I should report it immediately, but I hesitated. There was a sense of reverence, maybe fear, maybe warning that I couldn't shake. Reporting it would mean exposing it, making it real, and somehow I didn't want to do that. By the time I returned to the ranger station, the sun had almost disappeared. Shadows of the trees stretched across the road, long and thin, like fingers reaching into the night. I tried to shake off the feeling, rationalize it. Just an old cabin, abandoned, someone's private project. Nothing supernatural, nothing beyond the ordinary. But I couldn't, not fully. The sense of awareness, of patience, lingered in my mind. The cabin wasn't just a structure. It was a presence. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm echoed faintly in my memory, a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old station building reminded me of the cabin. Every shadow cast by the street lamp outside the window seemed to move just a little too deliberately. I knew one thing for certain. I would go back. I would have to. There are rules in this job about reporting, about documenting, about exploring unknown places. But something deeper drove me. A mixture of curiosity, unease, and a quiet understanding that some things in the forest refused to stay hidden. The cabin was waiting. And now, so was I. The lake was quiet when I first arrived, so still that it reflected the sky like glass. I had been walking the shoreline, flashlight in hand, checking for anything unusual, anything that might signal danger or a lost camper. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, and the occasional ripple of water against the rocks was the only sound. I breathed deeply, trying to shake the unease that had been settling into my chest ever since I saw the cabin the other day. It was late, almost midnight, and the forest around me had taken on that strange, patient quiet that always makes you feel like the trees are watching. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A distant sound carried across the water, sharp and raw. A cry, like someone screaming for help. I froze, my heart hammering. The lake stretched for nearly half a mile, and there was nothing on the shore. The sound echoed across the still surface, bouncing back from the far side of the lake, making the water tremble with its resonance. It was human, or at least it sounded human, desperate and ragged, and it carried a kind of urgency that pricked my nerves. I shined my flashlight across the water, scanning the shoreline, but saw nothing, just the dark silhouettes of trees and the glimmering reflection of the moon on the lake. I told myself it might be an animal, a fox or coyote, maybe a bird caught in distress, but the sound didn't match any animal I knew. It was deliberate, almost intelligent, a call meant to draw attention. Another cry followed, louder this time, cutting through the night air. I took a step toward the edge of the water, pebbles crunching under my boots. I could feel my chest tighten. I shouldn't be out here alone, not in the middle of nowhere, but curiosity, or maybe duty, pushed me forward. Step by step, I approached, straining to hear the source. The echoes were confusing, bouncing across the lake in waves that made it impossible to locate the exact spot. It was as if the sound came from everywhere at once, surrounding me, pressing against me, filling the night. I thought I caught movement on the far shore, a shadow, but the lake's surface was dark, mirroring the trees, and the shadows shifted with the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, waiting, watching. I reached the water's edge and crouched slightly, peering into the black reflection. Another cry rang out, sharp and piercing. This time, I could feel it vibrating through the ground beneath my knees, through the stones I was kneeling on. It was close, impossibly close, Yet when I looked, there was nothing, nothing, just the dark water, rippling slightly as if disturbed by invisible hands. I whispered into the night, though I didn't expect an answer. "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. Another cry answered me, closer now, yet somehow from the far side of the lake at the same time. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. Every rational thought told me to leave, to return the patrol truck, to radio it in, but something kept me rooted. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm of my heartbeat matched the rhythm of the cries, and I felt the air around me grow heavier. I moved along the shore, flashlight beams scanning the edge of the water. Driftwood lay scattered, wet and dark. Rocks glistened with moisture, and then I saw it, a figure, barely discernible, standing in the shallows on the opposite side. It was thin, hunched slightly, head tilted. I thought it might be a trick of the moonlight, a shadow, but it remained in the same position as the cries continued, stretching its neck like it was straining to be heard. I raised my hand to wave, to signal, but the moment I did, the figure vanished. Nothing but the rippling water remained. My stomach churned. My rational mind tried to explain it. Reflection, shadow, imagination. But my chest tightened with the knowledge that I had seen something real, something alive, or something that had once been alive. The cries had substance. The weight of them pressed into me. I stayed there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Every time I thought I had caught the source, it would vanish, reappearing elsewhere across the lake. It didn't move like a person walking. It wasn't the rhythm of running or crawling. It was deliberate, patient, watching me just as much as I was watching it. The air turned colder. A mist began to rise from the lake, curling across the rocks and shore like fingers, wrapping around my ankles and clinging to my clothes. The cries continued, fading in and out, sometimes soft, sometimes urgent, pulling me closer to the water. I wanted to run, wanted to turn back to the warmth and safety of the truck. But each cry felt like it was calling my name, beckoning me, testing me. I knelt by the water's edge, leaning forward to see beneath the surface. Nothing, just dark, moving water reflecting the moon. And yet I could feel presence. Something below the surface, waiting. Something patient, something aware of me. My reflection in the water shifted slightly, and for a moment, I thought it was a figure mirrored there. But no, it was my own face, wide-eyed, pale in the moonlight. And still, the cries continued, echoing across the lake, surrounding me. A sudden splash startled me. My flashlight beam shook as I turned toward the sound, but the water was calm again. The ripples stretched outward, slow and deliberate, and I realized that whatever was making the noise wasn't showing itself. Not fully. Not yet. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. The rhythm in my chest matched the rhythm of the cries, and I felt a shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with cold. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the dark water. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I couldn't turn my back completely. The cries carried something in them. Fear, warning, or invitation. I couldn't tell. The mist thickened, pressing against my skin, curling into my ears and nose, wrapping around me. I coughed, tried to shake it off, but it lingered, almost sentient. When I finally decided to leave, I didn't walk. I ran, stumbling over rocks and roots, breath coming in ragged bursts. I didn't look back at the lake, though I felt it behind me, echoing in the forest, pressing in from every side. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm haunted me even as I reached the trail and the distant lights of patrol vehicle. I never found the source of the cries. I reported nothing officially, and when colleagues asked, I told them I had probably heard some animal or campers in distress. But I knew better. Something was out there, something patient, waiting, aware, and I had glimpsed it, just enough to know it existed, just enough to carry its presence into my thoughts and dreams. Even days later, I could hear it when the night was still. Faint, distant, carried across some unseen water, a cry that sounded human, yet not human. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm of it burrowed into my chest, echoing in my heartbeat. I avoided the lake after that, told myself I was imagining it, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But I knew. I had heard it. I had seen it. And the memory lingered, patient and deliberate, like the lake itself had learned to call my name. Somewhere out there, across that water, it waits. And even now, when I lie in my cabin at night, miles from that forest, I sometimes hear it faintly just at the edge of hearing. Step, pause. Step, pause. The cries never stop. They are patient. They are aware. They remember. And I cannot forget. After the patrol that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the cabin. It had been sitting there, hidden in plain sight, yet absent from every official record I had. I went through the maps again and again, cross-referencing with old surveys and satellite images. Nothing. No cabin, no trail, no structure had ever been recorded in that exact spot. It was as if the forest had swallowed it whole, and time had never known it existed. I started digging into local records, county archives, anything that might hint at its origin. I sat in a musty office with boxes of yellowed papers and brittle photographs, asking the clerks if they knew of any permits, property deeds, anything unusual in that area. They shook their heads. That area hasn't had a building in decades. One clerk said, "There's only wilderness there, nothing else." The deeper I dug, the more the cabin became a puzzle that refused to be solved. There was no mention of it in old newspapers, no land deeds, no tax records. And yet, there it was, standing in the middle of the forest, aged, weathered, and deliberate. It had been built, cared for, used, but by whom? And why did no one remember it? I started to ask around the small towns near the forest. The locals were polite, but tight-lipped. Some avoided the topic entirely. Others offered fragmented stories, half memories passed down through whispers. One old man, sitting on a porch with a tobacco-stained smile, leaned in and said, "Some cabins, they're not meant to be found. People go in and they don't come out. That's what they tell you anyway." I pressed him for details. He chuckled nervously, waving his hand at the air. Stories, folklore, things you don't want to believe but can't ignore. Vanishings. People wander into the woods and don't return. Sometimes they show up again, changed or not at all. He looked me in the eyes, then serious, warning. And that cabin, well, no one talks about it much. I left with that echo in my head. Vanishings. Stories half remembered, shared in hushed voices. My rational mind tried to dismiss it, to pin it on fear, imagination, or local superstition. But every fiber of me knew there was something more. The cabin was real, but it didn't belong in any record. And that absence of history made it heavier, more deliberate, more dangerous. I returned to the forest during the day, trying to get a better look, to understand its placement. The path I had taken the first night was overgrown, almost hidden. It was as if the forest itself had tried to erase the trail, leaving only the cabin as a lingering, unnatural artifact. I walked around it carefully, touching the warped wood, the sagging roof, the carved symbols on the doorframe. Step by step, I cataloged every detail. Nothing about it made sense. The carvings were sharp in the daylight, more deliberate. Jagged lines, concentric circles, strange letters that I couldn't read. They looked old, but weathered in a way that didn't match the rest of the wood. I ran my fingers along one, and a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just the cold. There was something deliberate in the way it felt, like the wood itself remembered what had been done to it, like it had been waiting for me to notice. I circled the cabin, flashlight now unnecessary but still in hand, feeling the air tighten around me. The wind to the pines was constant, but here near the cabin, it seemed quieter, slower, as if the forest bent its rules around this structure. Even the birds avoided it. No insects, no small animals, not even a rustle of leaves beyond the occasional breeze. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Later, I researched folklore from the area. There were stories scattered and inconsistent about people disappearing in the woods, hunters gone without a trace, campers who never returned. Some claimed they had seen structures appear overnight, buildings that weren't there the day before. Others whispered about faces in the windows of empty cabins, pale and watching. Most of it seemed like stories to scare children, but the consistency was unsettling. One article mentioned an area called the Silent Pines. Supposedly, people had gone there decades ago and never returned. No official records, no investigations, just rumors and warnings. My pulse quickened as I read. The cabin I had found was deep, within what could have been considered the edge of that territory. Coincidence? Maybe, but the air around the words felt familiar, like the cold draft I had felt near the cabin's door. I couldn't explain why, but I felt an irresistible pull back to the cabin. Not curiosity, not even duty, something more primitive, more patient, calling me to witness, to acknowledge, to step inside. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm haunted me even in the safety of my office, echoing faintly with every page I turned, every document I read. I realized that the cabin's absence from maps and records wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. At night, I dreamed of it. I would walk the trail, the pines closing in, wind whispering a language I couldn't understand. The cabin would appear suddenly, sagging roof and darkened windows, waiting. And inside, I could hear movement. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, doors opening, closing, whispers curling along the walls. I would wake in a cold sweat, heart hammering, flashlight across the bed, convinced for a moment that it was real. Step, pause, step, pause. The more I read about vanishings, the more details fit together. People had walked into the forest alone, or sometimes in pairs, and never returned. When their families went searching, they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had been there at all. And then, sometimes weeks or months later, items appeared. Clothing, tools, personal belongings, always near small clearings, sometimes near a strange building that wasn't on any map. I began keeping notes, cataloging every detail, trying to create a history where none existed. But the more I documented, the less certain I felt. Every record of missing person, every whisper in the archives, every rumor from the locals, it painted a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. The cabin wasn't just hidden. It was alive in memory, in absence, in everything that wasn't recorded. It existed in a space between being and forgetting. One evening, I returned again, determined to get closer. The trail was nearly invisible, roots and undergrowth clawing at my boots. I reached the cabin as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the forest. I touched the doorframe again, tracing the carvings, and I swore that would pulse faintly beneath my fingertips. Not movement, exactly, but awareness, a presence, something patient, waiting, watching. Step, pause, step, pause. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind, the cold, the solitude of the forest. But even as I told myself that, I could feel the weight of the cabin pressing against me. I couldn't explain it in words, only in the heavy, oppressive silence that surrounded the structure. And when I looked at the windows, dark and unreadable, I had the sickening thought that maybe those vanishings were not accidents. Maybe the cabin had claimed them before in silence, patient and deliberate. I backed away slowly, noting every detail, every crack in the wood, every shadow that seemed too deep, too deliberate. As I left the clearing, I glanced back once. The cabin seemed to shimmer faintly in the twilight, as if it existed on the edge of reality itself, waiting for me or someone else to step inside. Step, pause, step, pause. That rhythm had embedded itself in my mind now, persistent, unyielding. The cabin had no history, and yet it carried weight. Weight of absence, weight of forgotten people, weight of memory that wasn't mine, but had attached itself to me anyway. Every document I read, every rumor I chased, every story whispered in the corners of nearby towns, they all led back to the same truth. Some things exist without record, without reason, without explanation, and some things remember. Even now, I can't shake the memory. I see the cabin when I close my eyes. I hear the whispers of the forest, the faint rustle of footsteps in empty rooms, the pull of the trail that shouldn't exist. Step, pause, step, pause. I feel in the quiet, in the shadows, in the edges of perception that the maps cannot define. The cabin waits, patient, deliberate, unseen by records, but ever present in the spaces it touches. The lake was different that night. I don't mean the usual stillness, the way it reflected the moon like a black mirror, or the soft lapping of water against the shore. I mean it felt altered. The air was heavy, almost thick, pressing against my skin with a quiet insistence. The fog had rolled in early, curling over the surface like smoke, and the forest around me seemed to retreat behind it, leaving me exposed on the damp shoreline. I had come back to the lake, unable to shake the feeling that something was there, waiting. The last patrol, the cries across the water, they haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard them. Step, pause. Step, pause. I needed to see, to understand, even if understanding meant risking my sanity. The mist was so dense that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My flashlight cut through it in a thin, trembling beam, but it only made the shadows deeper, the fog thicker. I walked slowly along the edge, boots sinking slightly into mud and wet grass, each step sounding unnaturally loud. I kept thinking I saw shapes moving just beyond a beam of light, dark, human-like, fleeting. Every time I focused, nothing was there, just fog, just the lake, just the forest, hiding its secrets. Then I saw them, faces, or at least shapes that resembled faces, pale, vague, floating within the mist. I froze, holding my breath. They were impossible to focus on. When I looked directly, they dissolved into nothingness, only to reform somewhere else as if the fog itself was shaping them. It wasn't just my imagination. I could feel their gaze, not angry or aggressive, but watchful, knowing, patient. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm returned, echoing somewhere deep in my chest, blending with my heartbeat until I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize it. It's the fog. It's just fog. I repeated it over and over, louder this time. But the faces didn't vanish entirely. They lingered at the edges, in peripheral vision, like my brain was trying to fill in shapes that weren't meant to exist. I blinked rapidly, rubbed my eyes, tried to shake my head clear. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm mocked me. I took a cautious step closer to the water. The fog seemed to react, curling and twisting in patterns that weren't random. Shapes appearing in it again, glimpses of pale faces, some screaming silently, some calm, all watching me. I raised my flashlight, scanning in every direction. Nothing that could explain what I had seen, but the feeling remained. Eyes on me from all angles. Step, pause. Step, pause. I started to question myself. Was it exhaustion? The isolation? The memory of the cabin? The cries? The vanishings? I had seen shadows before, chased ghosts of imagination after long patrols. But this was different. The fog had presence. It wasn't just mist and moisture. It was alive with intent. Watching, waiting. I could feel it crawling along the back of my neck, whispering to the part of my mind that knew it should turn and leave. A shape shifted closer, emerging from the gray haze. Pale, tall, faceless, or perhaps featureless in the low light. I froze again. The beam of my flashlight passed through it, illuminating nothing solid. Yet I felt its weight, its awareness pressing against me. My stomach churned while rising. Step, pause. Step, pause. My own movements echoed it now, syncing with the unseen rhythm of the fog. I stumbled back, tripping over roots hidden beneath the mist. My hands pressed into the mud as I scrambled upright, trying to focus, trying to anchor myself in reality. The shapes swirled, forming and dissolving, whispering a language I couldn't hear with my ears, but felt with my chest. Something patient, deliberate, try and communicate, or maybe to warn me. Step, pause. Step, pause. I gripped my flashlight tighter, pointing it toward the largest cluster of fog shapes. They condensed, vague humanoid forms, crouching, stretching, some taller than any human should be, and then they dissipated, replaced by the empty lake's surface, smooth and unbroken. I gasped, wet breath fogging in the cold air. My legs shook. I wanted to run, to turn back to the trail, to leave this place entirely. But part of me, the part that had followed the cabin and ignored every warning, kept me rooted. The mist thickened around me, curling higher, obscuring the forest entirely. I could no longer see the trail, the shoreline, even the opposite bank of the lake. The faces reappeared, closer now, more distinct, yet never fully formed. They whispered to me, voices rising and falling with the wind, a chorus of memory and warning I couldn't understand. Step, pause, step, pause. I shivered violently, heart hammering, mind teetering between disbelief and terror. I tried to speak. My own voice sounded small, distant. Who's there? Show yourself. Nothing, just the fog, curling and thickening, holding me captive in its gray embrace. I started walking backward, trying to orient myself, but the ground beneath my boots felt wrong, shifting slightly like the lake had spilled onto the shore. Panic clawed at my chest. Step, pause, step, pause. I could feel them moving with me, adjusting, waiting, synchronizing. Then a figure emerged more clearly than any before. A woman, I think, though the details were impossible to see. Her face was pale, blurred, almost as if painted by water. She didn't move toward me, didn't speak. She simply stood there, staring, or so I felt, and for a moment, the world went silent, the rhythm stopped, and I could hear only my own terrified breathing. I stumbled back again, tripping over the muddy bank, flashlight skidding from my hand. It clattered against a rock, spinning uselessly, and when I reached down to grab it, the fog shifted violently. The shapes dissolved and reformed, closer, pressing in, whispering now louder, a hissing chorus of voices, urgent, insistent. I felt my mind bending under the weight of it. Step, pause. Step, pause. I ran then blindly, crashing to the fog toward the only direction I knew, the trail. Branches whipped my face. Roots caught my boots. Mud clung to my pants. The faces followed, moving just beyond vision, teasing, never fully revealing themselves. The whispering carried in my ears, brushing against my thoughts, blending with memory, fear, and imagination until I wasn't sure what was real. Step, pause. Step, pause. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, the fog began to thin. The lake, visible again, was calm, smooth, unbroken. The faces were gone. The whispers faded. I was alone. My heart pounded, legs trembling. I sank to my knees at the edge of the trail, gasping for air, trying to convince myself it had been a trick, a hallucination, exhaustion mixing with fear and the memory of the cabin. But I knew it hadn't been my imagination entirely. I had felt them, their presence, their awareness, something alive in the mist, patient, deliberate, watching. Step, pause, step, pause. That rhythm was etched in my mind now, unshakable, lingering. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my cabin, flashlight on, maps spread across the table, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Rational explanations failed. Fog, shadows, exhaustion, they didn't account for the shapes, the weight, the whispering. And most terrifying of all, I could still feel it, patient and deliberate, lingering at the edges of perception. I have returned to the lake since, but only during the day, when the fog cannot gather in such unnatural density. Even then I feel it, the anticipation, the waiting. Step, pause. Step, pause. I know that when the fog returns, when night falls, it will be there again, waiting for the unwary, the curious, the persistent, and the faces will emerge, pale and silent, beckoning, watching, reminding me that some parts of the forest do not belong to us. They belong to memory, absence, and things that wait. And so I carry it with me, the knowledge that the lake is alive in a way I cannot name, that the fog can hold shapes, awareness, intent. Step, pause. Step, pause. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the faces drifting just beyond clarity, whispering a language I cannot understand but know exists. And I know I will hear them again, sooner or later, across the lake, in the fog. I thought I knew the lake. After that night with the fog, after the faces, after the whispers that seemed to linger in the edges of my mind, I told myself I had learned my lesson. I had studied the maps, scoured every record I could find, and yet the pull of that place was impossible to resist. There was something there, something patient, deliberate, and I knew it wasn't done with me. I arrived at the shoreline just as the sun began to dip, throwing long shadows over the water. The mist had not yet come, but the air was heavy and still, almost holding its breath. I had my flashlight and my ranger pack, everything I thought I might need, but deep down I knew I was going to need more than that. I told myself it was just my imagination, nerves, the weight of the previous nights. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm had become embedded in me, impossible to forget. I spotted the boat almost immediately. It wasn't docked, not tied to anything, not bobbing aimlessly. It drifted slowly, deliberately near the center of the lake. It was small, wooden, the kind used by fishermen or campers. But there was no one inside. No oars, no engine. It simply moved, cutting a path through the still water as if guided by something unseen. My pulse jumped, but curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, something instinctive, pushed me closer. I hesitated at the edge of the water. The surface was unnaturally calm, mirror-like, reflecting the darkening sky. The boat's movement was too deliberate to be caused by the current. I stepped forward, boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. I raised my hand, instinctively, to stop it, as if I could command it to halt, and I swear for a moment it did. The boat paused, floating just beyond reach, waiting. A shiver ran through me. The lake had a weight now, a presence I couldn't explain. It pressed against my skin, through my clothes, into my bones. And then I felt it, a tug. Faint at first, like the water itself had found my legs and was trying to pull me in. I stepped back instinctively, heart hammering. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm returned, echoing in my chest, synchronized with the pull of the lake. The tug grew stronger. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was deliberate, insistent. My boots slid in the mud as the water licked my ankles. I tried to yank free, but it was like the lake had grabbed my soul, tugging me closer to the floating wooden trap. Panic clawed at me. I turned to run, to climb the bank, but my feet felt glued to the mud, my arms heavy. The boat remained, drifting closer as if it had been waiting for me all along. I screamed, though no one was there to hear me. My hands clawed at the wet earth, trying to pull myself backward. The tug became a pull, yanking at my torso. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked down and saw my reflection in the dark water, twisted, pale, eyes wide with terror. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm was no longer in my chest. It spread through me, making my muscles spasm involuntarily, sinking my movements with the pull of the boat. I thought I might drown right there in the shallows. Before I even reached the center of the lake, something was in the water, patient, deliberate, dragging me toward the boat. I could feel it, alive, aware, like it had been waiting for me since the first patrol, since the first cries, since the fog. And then I realized it wasn't just a boat. The lake itself was a trap. Step, pause. Step, pause. My heartbeat echoed the rhythm of everything that had come before, everything I had feared, everything I could not explain. I managed to break the pull by throwing myself sideways onto the muddy bank. Sliding, crawling away, the boat drifted closer to the center of the lake, still unmanned, still waiting. My chest heaved, mud and water clinging to my clothes, adrenaline racing through me. I sat there for a moment, gasping, trying to convince myself I had escaped. But the weight remained. The lake pressed against my skin, against my mind, against my sense of reality. Step, pause. Step, pause. I couldn't leave, not yet. Something compelled me to understand, to watch, to witness. Slowly, cautiously, I rose to my feet, shaking, mud dripping from my boots. I approached the water again, careful, eyes fixed on the boat. And that's when I saw it. Shapes beneath the surface, moving with the boat. Pale, elongated, impossible. Human, maybe, though distorted, stretched by the reflection of the dark water and the dying light. They moved with purpose, undisturbed by the natural laws that govern everything else. Step, pause, step, pause. The boat stopped again, hovering just beyond reach. The shapes beneath twisted and writhed, faces pressing against the wood from below, mouths opening in silent screams. My stomach roiled, bowel rising, and for the first time I felt pure, unfiltered terror. Not the fear of danger, but the knowledge that I had glimpsed something beyond understanding. Something patient, deliberate, immortal in its intent. Step, pause, step, pause. I stumbled back, tripping over roots and stones, mud clinging to my hands as I tried to pull myself upright. The shapes receded for a moment, hidden beneath the boat's hull, but the water pulsed, as if breathing, alive. I felt it then, the pull again, stronger than before, tugging at me, dragging me toward the center. I screamed, thrashing, fighting against it, desperate. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm was inescapable. It was in the boat, the lake, the mist, and now, unrelenting in my own body. I don't know what gave me the final push to escape. Maybe it was sheer panic, maybe luck, maybe some fragment of instinct that refused to be claimed. I lunged sideways again, throwing myself out of shallow water and onto firmer ground. Mud caked my boots, clothes soaked, hands scraped, lungs burning. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. The boat stopped at the center, hovering, waiting for the next curious soul to step too close. Step, pause, step, pause. I ran up the trail, branches whipping my face, leaves clinging to my clothes. My heart pounded in sync with the rhythm that had haunted me since the first patrol, since the cries across the lake, since the fog and the faces. Step, pause, step, pause. Even as I reached the edge of the forest, I could feel it following, pressing against the edges of perception, waiting for another moment of weakness. When I finally reached my cabin, drenched, trembling, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, flashlight on, trying to comprehend what I had witnessed. The boat, the shapes beneath, the pull. It wasn't just water and wood. It was deliberate, alive, patient. And now I understood something I hadn't before. The lake claimed attention, memory, presence. And once it had it, it never truly let go. Step, pause, step, pause. Even now, I hear in the quiet. The rhythm of my heartbeat merges with the pull of memory. The images of the boat hovering, the faces beneath, waiting. Step, pause, step, pause. I avoid the lake when I can. I avoid the fog. I avoid the call. But I know, as surely as I know the sun will rise and set, that the boat is there, patient, deliberate, waiting. And if I ever go back, I know it will find me again, no matter how far I run, no matter how carefully I avoid it. Step, pause, step, pause. The lake is alive in a way I cannot name. The water moves not by wind or current, but by intention. The boat drifts unmanned, guided by something beyond human understanding. The faces beneath, the pull that drags, the whispers in the fog, they are all connected. And I carry the memory of it like a weight in my chest, a constant reminder that some things in this world are patient, deliberate, and waiting. Step, pause, step, pause. I don't know how long I sat by the cabin that night, staring at the lake. I don't know how long the rhythm echoed in my chest, mingling with terror, with awe, with understanding I couldn't fully grasp. But I knew one thing. The boat waits and always will. For anyone curious, anyone brave, anyone foolish enough to step too close. Step, pause, step, pause. The snow had come early that year, blanketing the forest in a thick, silent white. The kind of snow that swallows sound, smooths the earth, and makes every step feel isolated, deliberate. I had been following tracks for hours, careful to keep my movements quiet, ears straining for the smallest shift in the frozen underbrush. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying a cold bite that seemed to seep under my jacket and into my bones. I wasn't sure why I was here, alone, in the middle of the forest with only the tracks to guide me. Hunting, they would have said. Maybe, but this wasn't about deer or elk or anything ordinary. The tracks were strange, too wide, too deliberate, some almost human, others not. They zigzagged through trees, avoiding natural obstacles, cutting across slopes and frozen streams as if whoever, or whatever, had left them was careful not to disturb anything else. I crouched beside one track, fingertips brushing the powdery snow. The imprint was deep, almost deliberate. The snow had settled in the edges, yet the depth suggested weight. Weight that didn't belong to any normal animal I knew. My heart thumped in my chest. I shouldn't have been here, and yet I couldn't stop myself. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm of my own heartbeat seemed to echo the track ahead. Or perhaps the track had been laid for me, guiding me somewhere I didn't yet understand. The forest was silent beyond the occasional creak of a branch under the weight of ice. No birds called. No squirrels darted across the snow. The tracks led deeper, and with each step, I felt the sense of being watched intensify. Shadows clung to the trees differently here, leaning in subtly, and I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. The forest does that, I thought. It twists what you see. It bends your mind. But the tracks kept going, beckoning, patient. Hours passed, or maybe it was less, maybe more. Time had no meaning here. My legs ached, breath puffing out in clouds, freezing in the cold air. And then I saw it, a shape among the trees ahead, dark against the snow. At first I thought it was a fallen tree or a boulder, but as I drew closer, I realized it was a lodge, abandoned, sagging with age and covered in frost. Its windows were dark, the roof bowed under the weight of the snow. The tracks led straight to it. I approached cautiously, senses alert. There was no sign of recent activity beyond the tracks themselves. No smoke from a chimney. No footprints other than the ones that had brought me here. The door hung slightly ajar, hinges creaking faintly in the cold wind. I couldn't explain why, but I felt both drawn to it and repelled, an instinctive sense that stepping inside would change everything. Step, pause, step, pause. My heartbeat followed the rhythm, like the tracks had summoned me here, and I realized I had no choice but to continue. The snow around the lodge was pristine, except where the tracks ended at the doorway. I ran my fingers along the edge of the wooden frame. The wood was rough, splintered in places, but there were scratches along the surface, deliberate, sharp, running in patterns I couldn't immediately decipher. My stomach knotted. Someone had been here, or something, and it had left its mark. I stepped inside. The air was heavier than outside, damp with decay and something else I couldn't name. The snow had been tracked in, leaving small, uneven piles on the floorboards. Dust covered the furniture. Yet there was a subtle sense of disturbance, as if someone or something had moved through here recently. I traced my fingers along the edge of a table. Tiny grooves, scratches, etched into the wood. Not haphazard, but deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm from the forest seemed to follow me indoors, insistent, pressing against the edges of perception. I explored cautiously, shining my flashlight over the interior. The lodge was small, simple, but not abandoned in the sense I had imagined. Things had been left behind. A rusted kettle, a chair toppled, a book lying open. The pages were blank. Yet I could feel a sense of intent, a memory lingering where words should have been. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, cast by the narrow beam of my light. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, patient, deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. The fireplace was cold, filled with ashes that hadn't aged naturally. I knelt to examine them. The ash was fine black, almost metallic in some places. I thought I recognized fragments of burnt wood, but some particles seemed too sharp, too deliberate, as if burned with a purpose I couldn't understand. I swallowed hard. The sense of being watched intensified. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight sweeping over every corner. Nothing, yet I could feel it, lurking just beyond vision, aware of every movement. Then I saw the tracks again, small, narrow, leading from one side of the room to the other. They weren't human, not entirely. They were jagged, uneven, yet purposeful, carrying a rhythm I couldn't name. Step, pause. Step, pause. I realized with a jolt that the rhythm had been here all along, in the snow, in the scratches in the wood, following me since I had left the path. And now it was here, inside. A chill swept through the lodge. The door creaked behind me, swinging slightly in the wind. I spun around, flashlight raised, and the beam landed on the far corner. Shadows danced along the wall, stretching unnaturally. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure, tall, thin, human-like, but impossible in proportion. Step, pause. Step, pause. It wasn't moving, or maybe it was subtly synchronized with the rhythm. I couldn't be sure. I backed toward the doorway, chest tightening, mind racing. The tracks, the scratches, the lodge itself. It all felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. The rhythm pulsed in my chest, in my arms, in my legs. Step, pause. Step, pause. I stumbled over a rug, thin layer of frost from the broken window covering, and caught myself on the edge of a chair. My hands trembled. Breath came in ragged gasps. I couldn't tell if I was afraid or enthralled, or if there was a difference. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through broken windows, carrying the scent of pine, ice, and something older, something deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. The lodge seemed to answer, a soft groaning of wood and metal. The rhythm was everywhere now, in the floor beneath my feet, in the walls, in the snow outside. It pressed against me, insistent, patient. I realized then that the lodge was more than abandoned. It was waiting for someone, for me. I turned back toward the trail, scanning the lodge one last time. The door creaked, swinging wider as if inviting me to leave, or perhaps warning me not to. The tracks outside were no longer visible in the new snowfall, erased by wind and drifting snowflakes. Yet I knew they were still there, waiting under the fresh white layer. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm followed me as I walked back toward the edge of the forest, every step echoing against the silence. By the time I reached my cabin, the sun had dipped fully below the horizon, and the forest was bathed in deep blue twilight. My hands were numb, my legs stiff, but the memory of the lodge, of the tracks, of the rhythm pulsing beneath it all, refused to leave me. Step, pause. Step, pause. I sat by the fire, trying to ground myself in warmth, in light, in the ordinary. But I knew that the forest, the lodge, the tracks, they were patient. They waited. Step, pause. Step, pause. And they would always be there, calling, watching, deliberate. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the cold or the darkness. It was the smell. Rot. Not the kind of rot you get from old leaves or damp earth, but something heavier, more insidious. A stench that seemed to curl around my throat, pressing into my lungs, crawling down my spine. Step, pause. Step, pause. My heartbeat echoed the rhythm, but this time it wasn't comforting. It felt like the lodge itself was alive, breathing with me, marking me. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots as I moved forward, eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered through broken windows. Dust hung thick in the air, dancing in the beams of my flashlight. But beneath the dust was something else, something deliberate. The walls were scratched, carved in patterns that didn't make sense at first. Thin lines, deep grooves, symbols I didn't recognize. Some looked like letters, others like eyes, and some twisted into shapes that made my stomach knot. Step, pause. Step, pause. I ran my fingers along one of the carvings. The wood was rough, splintered. My hand trembled, partly from the cold, mostly from something else. Fear? Unease? Or the realization that this place had been touched by someone or something with intent. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm was inescapable. It was here inside the lodge, following me, pressing against the edges of my mind. I moved deeper, flashlight sweeping over broken furniture, a toppled chair, a table overturned. Everything was coated in a layer of dust, yet there were traces of movement. Footprints? Maybe, though too faint, too inconsistent to be human. Somebody had been here recently, or something that moved in ways humans do not. Step, pause, step, pause. I could feel it, just beyond the edges of vision, shaping the shadows, pressing awareness against my back. The smell grew stronger. I gagged, hand covered my mouth, trying to force it down, to ignore it. It wasn't just decay. It was deliberate, pungent, almost ritualistic. It filled the room, curling into my nose, throat, lungs. I coughed, staggered back a step, and in that moment, I noticed the floorboard beneath me. Dark stains, wet, sticky, as if something had been dragged. Step, pause, step, pause. My pulse pounded in my ears. I followed the stains, careful, boots slipping slightly on the cold, damp wood. They led to the far corner of the room, where the shadows clung thickest. I raised my flashlight and froze. The walls here were covered in markings, far denser than the rest of the lodge. Faces, hundreds of them, etched in shallow grooves, twisted in expressions of terror, anguish, and pain. Some seemed almost real, their eyes dark hollows that followed me as I moved. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm now felt like it belonged to them, not me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. The smell of rot was strongest here, thick, suffocating. I could almost taste it, metallic and sharp. It made my stomach churn. I wanted to leave, run out into the snow, away from this place. But something held me there, compelled me to study the faces, the symbols, the way the markings seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly. Step, pause, step, pause. I felt eyes on me from all angles, patient, deliberate, waiting. I moved closer to the wall, hand tracing the outlines of one face. The grooves were shallow, yet they left impressions on my fingertips, impressions that burned with a strange heat. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm was everywhere, in the floorboards, in the carvings, in my own chest. I realized with shock that it had been here all along. The lodge itself following me, marking me, shaping me. A low sound reached my ears, barely audible at first. A creak? A sigh? I couldn't tell. Step, pause. Step, pause. The sound grew louder, echoing from the walls themselves. The faces seemed to shift, their expressions stretching, turning toward me. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking, and for a moment, everything was still. The smell thickened, pressing into me, clawing at my lungs. Step, pause, step, pause. I forced myself to breathe, to focus, to remember why I was here. Tracks in the snow had led me. Curiosity had carried me, and now knowledge, or at least understanding, was calling me forward. I scanned the room again. There were more markings than I had first noticed, symbols hidden among the dust and rot. Thin, jagged lines etched into the wood, into the beams, into the furniture. Each one deliberate, patient, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. I approached the fireplace. The hearth was filled with old ashes, blackened and brittle. Yet there were pieces of something else among them. Fragments of bone, maybe, or splintered wood. I couldn't be sure. My stomach turned. I wanted to step back, to leave, but something compelled me to continue, to witness, to understand. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm was inescapable, in the lodge, in the markings in me. I ran my fingers along the edge of the fireplace. Deep scratches, gouges, almost like claws. Step, pause. Step, pause. I realized then that whatever had been here had left pieces of itself behind. Marks, smells, reminders that had been patient, deliberate, and aware of anyone who came too close. The air seemed to thrum, vibrating with unseen presence. Step, pause. Step, pause. The shadows moved slightly, curling along the walls, bending with the beam of my flashlight. I turned in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. The smell of rot was nearly unbearable now. Thick, invasive. Faces on the walls seemed to twist and writhe, expressions changing, reflecting something I couldn't name. Step, pause. Step, pause. The lodge was alive, or at least aware, following my thoughts, anticipating my movements. I backed toward the door, heart racing, lungs burning. I wanted to leave to escape the smell, the carvings, the awareness pressing against me. But even as I turned, I noticed more symbols, smaller ones etched into corners, into the edges of furniture, into places I had missed. Step, pause, step, pause. They were everywhere, patient, deliberate, marking the lodge as theirs. I stumbled outside, the cold hitting me like a wall. Snow crunched beneath my boots. I gasped, filling my lungs with crisp air, trying to purge the rot, the smell, the presence. Step, pause, step, pause. The lodge loomed behind me, dark and patient. I knew, even as I ran, that it had followed me in some small way, that the carvings, the smell, the awareness, they had imprinted themselves on me. Step, pause, step, pause. I didn't look back again, not until I was well past the treeline. The forest was quiet, blanketed in snow, swallowing sound once more. But the lodge remained patient, deliberate, marking the world in ways I could not erase. Step, pause, step, pause. I carried the memory with me now, a rhythm embedded in my chest, reminded me that some places, some things, are not meant to be understood. That decay, that rot, that deliberate marking, it waits, and it watches. Step, pause, step, pause. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see the lodge, the carvings, feel the smell of rot curling in my lungs, pressing against me. Step, pause, step, pause. And I know, sooner or later, the lodge will call again, patient, deliberate, waiting for anyone curious enough to follow the tracks in the snow. Night had settled over the forest like a thick blanket, silent and heavy, the kind of darkness that seems to absorb sound, swallowing even the wind. I had returned to the lodge, unable to stay away despite the smell of rot, the carvings, the rhythm that seemed to follow me from the snow. I told myself it was curiosity, research, maybe obsession, but deep down I knew it was something else, something patient, something deliberate. The fire I managed to coax from old, damp logs flickered weakly in the corner of the room. Shadows stretched and danced across the walls, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm was still there, subtle, embedded in my chest. My heart thumped in time, matching the pulse I felt from the lodge itself. I sat near the window, flashlight and notebook beside me, writing down my observations. Or maybe I was just trying to convince myself I was doing research. I had been alone for hours, yet I felt watched. That feeling had been with me since the tracks in the snow, and it had never left. Step, pause, step, pause. I shook it off, blaming the wind, the empty lodge, my imagination. But then I noticed it, a flicker outside the glass. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. There, beyond the frost-rimmed window, 2 points of light glowed, high and low, fixed, unblinking. Eyes, glowing eyes that reflected something unworldly, something deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm in my chest intensified, as if my body recognized what my mind could barely comprehend. I swallowed hard, hand tightening around the flashlight. My legs refused to move, rooted in terror and fascination. The eyes remained, unblinking, patient. I tried to reason with myself. Animals, maybe deer or wolves. But no animal's eyes glow like that. Not in the dead of night. Not at the same height. Not with that intent. Step, pause. Step, pause. I leaned close to the window, breath fogging the glass. The eyes moved slightly, following me. Or perhaps the shadows moved, tricking me. My mind spun, heart hammering, trying to grasp the impossible. Step, pause. Step, pause. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet I stayed compelled, as if the lodge itself had drawn me to this moment. I glanced around the room, trying to find something to ground myself. The carvings, the rot, the ash, all still present, all still pressing against me with their silent insistence. Step, pause. Step, pause. I couldn't escape the feeling that the lodge was aware, that it had prepared for this, that the eyes outside were part of its deliberate design. Suddenly, the eyes blinked, or at least I thought they did. A flicker of movement, too quick to register clearly. Step, pause, step, pause. Panic surged, and I stumbled back from the window. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, illuminating jagged carvings that seemed to shift with the shadows. Faces, symbols, eyes carved into the wood, watching me as I watched the eyes outside. I felt a cold draft brush against my neck, making the hairs rise on my arms. The door had shifted, hanging slightly ajar, and for a moment, I could swear I heard a low, deliberate sigh, like the lodge itself exhaled. Step, pause, step, pause. I turned sharply, scanning the room, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing, yet the sensation of being watched intensified, pressing from every angle, from every shadow, from the very walls. I returned to the window, heart hammering, and the eyes were still there, closer, somehow, or maybe the darkness had shifted to reveal more. Step, pause, step, pause. There were more now. Pairs of glowing dots scattered in the forest beyond, reflecting nothing, but moving as if aware of me, deliberate, waiting. I could feel their awareness pressing against my mind. My breath came in ragged gasps, clouding the window further, yet I could not look away. I realized, with a cold surge of terror, that the rhythm had changed. Step, step, pause, step, step, pause. It was faster now, insistent, matching the quickened beat of my heart. The eyes were no longer just outside. They were everywhere, in the shadows of the lodge, in the shapes of the carvings, in the spaces between reality and imagination. Step, step, pause, step, step, pause. I stumbled backward, nearly toppling the chair. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Could it be a trick of the mind? Exhaustion? Hunger? Or was it something patient, deliberate, waiting for someone foolish enough to follow the tracks in the snow and enter its domain? Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm pulsed through the floorboards, through the walls, through me. The fire flickered and dimmed, shadows stretching impossibly long across the room. I could feel them, the lodge, the eyes, watching, waiting. Step, pause, step, pause. The sense of being observed was unbearable now, pressing from all sides. I wanted to scream, but the sound seemed to choke in my throat. My flashlight beam shook across the room, illuminating carvings that had not been there before. Or perhaps I had simply not seen them. Faces, symbols, eyes etched deep into the wood, patient, deliberate. I turned from the window and froze. A shadow moved along the far wall, stretching, bending unnaturally. Step, pause, step, pause. My mind screamed for reason, for explanation, but reason offered none. The lodge was alive in a way I could not name, aware of me, aware of the fear that had become my pulse. The eyes outside remained fixed, waiting, patient. Step, pause, step, pause. I stumbled toward the doorway, flashlight trembling, heart hammering. The shadows seemed to lean in, following me, pressing awareness into my mind. Step, pause, step, pause. I felt the lodge's presence like a hand on my shoulder, guiding, warning, reminding me that I had come here willingly, and now I could not leave entirely unmarked. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of snow, pine, and something older, something deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. I could feel the eyes in the darkness, patient, deliberate, aware. They were not animals, not ghosts, not entirely human. Something older, something waiting, marking me with their presence. Step, pause, step, pause. I returned to window, unable to resist. The eyes were gone. Or perhaps they had simply melted into the darkness, waiting for another moment to reveal themselves. Step, pause, step, pause. My pulse slowed slightly, but the rhythm remained, embedded in my chest, my arms, my legs. I knew, somehow, that the lodge, the forest, the tracks in the snow, all were patient. Step, pause, step, pause, and they would wait. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the corner, fire flickering, flashlight beside me, notebook untouched. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm echoed in the silence, in the shadows, in my mind. Outside, I knew the eyes were there, watching, deliberate, waiting for the next moment of curiosity, the next moment of weakness. Step, pause, step, pause. Even now, when I think of that night, I can feel them. Step, pause, step, pause. The eyes patient, the lodge deliberate, and the rhythm always a rhythm. Following, marking, never letting go, I had been wandering the lodge for hours, the flashlight slicing through dust and shadows, the smell of rot still thick in the air. Every step felt deliberate, as if the lodge itself was guiding me, pulling me deeper into its secrets. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm was embedded in my chest now, a pulse I could not escape. I wasn't sure whether it was the lodge's rhythm or my own, or if it had even mattered for some time. That's when I noticed the wall in the corner near the fireplace. Something about it seemed off. Too flat, too smooth, as if it hadn't aged the same way as the rest of the lodge. I ran my hand along it, fingertips brushing over cold, rough wood until I felt a small seam, almost hidden in the shadows. A door, a hidden door, set seamlessly into the wall, and it wasn't locked. Step, pause, step, pause. My heartbeat jumped, echoing the rhythm, warning me and urging me forward all at once. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. Part of me screamed to leave, to run into the snow, away from the lodge, away from whatever was inside. But curiosity, something patient, deliberate, compelled me to turn the handle. Step, pause, step, pause. I pulled the door open slowly, and a chill rolled out, heavy and sharp, pressing into my chest. The room beyond was small, cramped, and filled with a weight I couldn't name. The first thing I noticed was a smell, older, more pungent than the lodge itself, a mixture of decay, dust, and something metallic. Step, pause, step, pause. I stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the space, revealing shelves crowded with objects I couldn't immediately recognize. Bones, small carvings, jars of what I hoped were nothing more than water, but something about them made my stomach tighten. Step, pause, step, pause. I moved closer to one shelf. There were photographs, yellowed and curled at the edges, pinned haphazardly to the wall above. I picked one up, hard hammering, and the cold metal of the tack burned my fingertips. Hunters, missing hunters, I realized with a jolt. Men and women I vaguely recognized from local reports. Photographs that were decades old and yet somehow recent. Their eyes stared back at me, blank and accusing, a silent warning. Step, pause, step, pause. I set the photograph down, trembling, and glanced around the room again. Objects lined every surface, from the floor to the ceiling. Small figurines, carved with jagged precision, each one unique yet somehow familiar, like they were modeled after the missing hunters themselves. Step, pause, step, pause. I couldn't look away. The sense of being observed was overwhelming. The lodge, the hidden room, the objects, they were aware of me and patient, deliberate. I noticed a journal on a small table. The leather cover was cracked and brittle, the pages filled with spidery handwriting. I flipped it open, trying to steady my shaking hands. Names, dates, and locations, all of them hunters who had vanished near this forest, near this lodge. Notes about strange sounds, unexplainable shadows, glowing eyes, and patterns carved into trees and walls. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm echoed through me, now inseparable from the lodge itself. One entry caught my attention. The handwriting was hurried, desperate. They wait. The lodge watches. The eyes follow. The carvings mark. You cannot leave unchanged. I am... The page ended abruptly, ripped or torn, leaving a void I could not fill. I shivered, realizing that whoever had written this had not survived, or had left in a way I could not comprehend. Step, pause. Step, pause. I set the journal down, stepping back, and my flashlight caught another object, a mirror, small and cracked, leaning against the far wall. I approached it, and the reflection made my stomach turn. Not just my own face, pale and wide-eyed, but faint shapes behind me, shadows that shouldn't exist. Step, pause. Step, pause. I spun around, but the room was empty, nothing more than shelves, objects, photographs. Yet the sense of being watched remained, heavier than ever. A low creaking sound came from the ceiling, the floor above. Step, pause. Step, pause. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The rhythm pulsed in my chest, faster now, insistent. I realized that the hidden room was not just a storage of memories. It was a shrine, a deliberate collection of those who had come before. Each object, each photograph, each carving marked the presence of someone who had entered the lodge and had been observed, studied, perhaps trapped. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tried to leave, hand on the door, but the lodge seemed to resist. The shadows shifted subtly, curling around the edges of the room. Step, pause. Step, pause. The objects on the shelves seemed to lean toward me, almost imperceptibly, urging me to stay, to witness, to become another mark in their patient, deliberate collection. My pulse raced. Step, pause. Step, pause. I realized with a jolt that I had been too careless, too curious, and now the lodge knew I was here fully, aware of me pressing against my mind. The photographs seemed to flicker, faces twisting in silent agony. The carvings, the figurines, the mirror, they were all alive with intent, deliberate, waiting for the next step I would take. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tore my gaze away and focused on the journal again. One last entry, almost illegible. Do not follow the tracks. The lodge does not forgive curiosity. The eyes, step, pause. Step, pause. The words resonated in my chest, matching the rhythm, echoing the pulse that had never left me since the first track in the snow. I stumbled backward, almost knocking over a shelf, and in that moment, the door seemed farther than before, as if the room itself had stretched, expanded to trap me for a moment longer. Step, pause. Step, pause. I realized with cold clarity that the hidden room was deliberate, patient, and aware, designed to test, to observe, to mark, and I had crossed its threshold willingly. Finally, I lunged to the door, hand gripping the handle, and pulled it open. Cold air from the lodge rushed in, and I stumbled outside, gasping, chest burning, eyes wide. The hidden room was behind me, dark and silent, but I knew it had watched me, studied me, marked me in some unnameable way. Step, pause. Step, pause. I ran through the snow, the lodge shrinking behind me, shadows pressing against the edges of my vision. Step, pause. Step, pause. Even now, days later, I can feel it, the rhythm in my chest, the lodge, the hidden room, patient and deliberate. The photographs, the carvings, the objects, they are not just relics, they are warnings, and they are waiting. Step, pause. Step, pause. When I think of the hidden room, I remember the smell of rot, the weight of the objects, the eyes that seem to follow me even in stillness. Step, pause. Step, pause. I know I carry a piece of that room with me, a pulse embedded in my mind, marking me as someone who has seen, who has known, who has crossed the threshold of the lodge. And I know, somewhere in the shadows, patient and deliberate, the lodge waits for the next step. Step, pause. Step, pause. I didn't think. I just ran. The lodge, the hidden room, the carvings, the photographs, all that left behind in a rush of fear that tore through my chest and made my legs move faster than I thought possible. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm had followed me inside the hidden room, marking me, and now it followed me in every step I took through the snow and the pines. The forest was a maze of shadows, trunks standing like silent sentinels, the snow crunching under my boots with every frantic step. Step, pause. Step, pause. I couldn't tell where the lodge ended and the forest began. The shadows pressed close, curling around me, bending the faint moonlight into shapes I didn't recognize. Step, pause. Step, pause. My breath came in ragged gasps, miscurling in the freezing air. At first, it was silence, only the crunch of snow underfoot. Then I heard it. Whispers, soft at first, barely audible, curling through the pines like smoke. Step, pause. Step, pause. I froze, straining my ears. The whispers weren't words. Not exactly. They were fragments, syllables, hissing murmurs that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Step, pause. Step, pause. My heart thumped in response, each beat echoing the rhythm of the forest, matching the pulse of the lodge still embedded in me. I ran again, moving blindly, branches scratching my face and arms. Step, pause. Step, pause. The whispers followed, never louder, never clearer. Just there, curling around me, patient and deliberate. I realized with a chill that I wasn't alone, and perhaps I had never truly been alone. Step, pause. Step, pause. The lodge, the hidden room, the carvings, they had extended their reach into the forest, marking the trees, the shadows, and now me. Snow fell heavier, dusting the tops of branches and muffling sound, but it didn't silence the whispers. Step, pause. Step, pause. They grew bolder, brushing against my ears, wrapping around my mind. I wanted to stop, to turn and face whatever it was, but my legs carried me forward, propelled by fear, by instinct, by something patient and deliberate pulling me deeper into the pines. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tripped over a root, sprawled across the snow, and my flashlight skidded out of reach. Step, pause. Step, pause. Darkness pressed against me, thick and cold, and I scrambled to my feet, fingers scraping against frozen earth. The whispers circled me, teasing, taunting, deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, patient, aware, waiting for the next mistake. Branches whipped across my face, and I stumbled down a slope, snow crunching beneath me, heart hammering in my chest. Step, pause. Step, pause. The rhythm was relentless now, inescapable, echoing in every heartbeat, every breath, every frantic motion. I realized with cold clarity that the lodge, the hidden room, the carvings, they were not just memories. They were active, deliberate, following me through the woods, marking my fear, shaping my panic. Step, pause. Step, pause. I paused briefly behind a fallen pine, chest heaving, eyes straining to see in the darkness. The whispers were closer now, brushing against my ears, curling around my thoughts. Step, pause. Step, pause. I could feel them in the wind, in the sway of the branches, in the crunch of snow beneath my boots. They were patient, they were deliberate, and they were waiting. Step, pause. Step, pause. I ran again, zigzagging through the forest, snow blinding me, branches tearing at my clothes. Step, pause. Step, pause. Each step echoed the rhythm embedded in me. The pulse of the lodge, the hidden room, the carvings. I realized that I would never truly escape it. Not the lodge, not the room, not the objects that had marked me. Step, pause. Step, pause. The whispers knew where I was, knew what I feared, knew how to keep me moving. A sudden crack of wood nearby made me jump, nearly toppling over. Step, pause. Step, pause. I spun, but the forest was empty, or at least it appeared so. The shadows moved, curling and bending, deliberate, aware. The whispers brushed closer, carrying a language I could not comprehend, yet somehow understood. Patience, warning, intent. Step, pause. Step, pause. The snow thickened, and my feet sank with every step, slowing me, threatening to pin me to the ground. Step, pause. Step, pause. Panic surged, and I ran harder, muscles screaming, lungs burning. The rhythm echoed in my ears, faster, more insistent. Step, pause, step, pause. The whispers press around me, teasing, curling, deliberate. I could feel their awareness pressing against the back of my skull, marking me, reminding me that I had crossed into something older, something patient. I stumbled onto a ridge, overlooking a small frozen stream. Step, pause, step, pause. I paused, trying to catch my breath, and the whisper stopped. Step, pause, step, pause. Silence. But it wasn't relief. It was deliberate, like the forest itself was holding its breath, watching, waiting. I could see my reflection in the ice, pale, wide-eyed, trembling. Step, pause, step, pause. And in the corner of my vision, I thought I saw them. Shadows move among the pines, patient, deliberate, aware. I ran down the ridge, breaking through low branches, boots slipping on ice. Step, pause, step, pause. Every step brought the whispers back, curling around me, circling, teasing, reminding me that I had been marked, that the lodge and its hidden room had followed me into the forest, had left a piece of themselves in my chest, in my mind, in my pulse. Step, pause, step, pause. I stumbled across another fallen tree, nearly crashing into the snow. Step, pause, step, pause. I realized with horror that the forest itself had changed. Trees seemed closer together, shadows thicker, shapes bending as I passed. Step, pause, step, pause. The whispers were insistent now, deliberate, threading into my thoughts. Don't stop, don't look back, keep moving. Step, pause, step, pause. Branches tore at my jacket and face, snow filling my gloves and boots. Yet I ran on. Step, pause, step, pause. The whispers shifted, growing louder in my mind, shaping shadows into forms I could barely comprehend. Step, pause, step, pause. I tripped again, catching myself just in time, and the rhythm pulsed faster, echoing the fear pounding in my chest. Step, pause, step, pause. I could see the faint lights of the road ahead, barely visible through the trees. Step, pause, step, pause. Hope surged, yet the whispers pressed in tighter, deliberate, patient. Step, pause, step, pause. I ran harder, snow clinging to my boots, breath freezing in my lungs, shadows bending closer, following, waiting. Step, pause, step, pause. Finally, I burst onto the road, gasping, shaking, the whispers retreating just enough to leave me with ragged silence. Step, pause, step, pause. I didn't stop, didn't look back, even as the lodge and the hidden room, patient and deliberate, seemed to recede behind the trees. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm in my chest remained, a pulse I could not shake, marking me as someone who had seen, who had been touched by something older, deliberate, patient. Even now, as I recount it, I can hear the whispers, faint, curling at the edges of my mind. Step, pause, step, pause. They are patient, deliberate, aware. The lodge, the hidden room, the carvings, they are not gone. And I know that somewhere in the forest, through the pines, something still watches, still waits, still marks. Step, pause, step, pause. I ran to the pines that night, but I carry the forest with me, the rhythm in my chest, the pulse in my mind. Step, pause, step, pause. And I know that the next time curiosity leads someone into the snow, into the lodge, into the hidden room, the whispers will return, patient and deliberate, waiting for the next step, marking the next heartbeat, shaping the next shadow. Step, pause, step, pause. I remember the first time I arrived at that cabin. I had taken the job because I thought it would be easy, just a quiet week alone in the woods, tending the place, keeping things in order. It was far from town, down a winding dirt road that disappeared into the pines. And when I first saw the cabin through the fog, I felt a mix of relief and unease. It was small, wooden, weathered from years of snow and rain, and there was a smell about it damp, musty, almost sweet in a way that reminded me of old forests. I carried my bag up to the porch, the boards creaking beneath my weight, and unlocked the door. Inside, it smelled even more strongly of wood, dust, and old smoke. The fireplace was cold, the floorboards rough under my boots, and the furniture simple and sparse. I dropped my bag and ran my hands over the surfaces, wiping away the thin layer of dust. It was the kind of place that looked empty, but not abandoned. Not really. Something lingered, patient and deliberate, that I couldn't name. The sun was already setting, leaving long shadows across the floor. I unpacked what little I brought: a few clothes, canned food, a flashlight, a notebook. I told myself it was just preparation, nothing more, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin had been waiting for me. Step, pause, step, pause. That's what I would come to recognize over the next several hours. A rhythm to the place, subtle but unmistakable, as if the walls themselves breathed, pulsing quietly beneath my skin. I decided to make a fire. I stacked the wood in the fireplace, striking a match and watching the flame catch. The light flickered across the room, illuminating the rough walls, the simple furniture, the small objects left behind by whoever had been here before. Step, pause, step, pause. I kept thinking I heard something, almost a whisper, but every time I turned, nothing was there, just the shadows, stretching and curling, deliberate and patient. Night fell quickly. I sat near the fire, trying to write in my notebook, but my hands kept shaking. I wrote about the smell, the cold, the way the shadows moved. Step, pause, step, pause. And then I noticed something strange about the window across from me. Frost had formed on the glass, and in the uneven patches, I thought I saw shapes moving outside. Trees bending in impossible ways, or perhaps figures. My stomach tightened, and I leaned closer, squinting, but it was gone. Only the frost remained, silent and patient. I tried to calm myself. It was my first night alone, after all. Maybe I was imagining things. Step, pause, step, pause. I told myself to breathe, to focus on mundane tasks. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, even though I knew they were already secure. The cabin was old but sturdy, safe, or at least I wanted to believe it was. Step, pause, step, pause. Hours passed slowly. The wind rose outside, rattling the window panes and sending faint groans through the walls. Step, pause, step, pause. The sound was rhythmic, almost matching the pulse I had felt in the cabin since I arrived. It was subtle, insidious, pressing against my thoughts without warning. I tried to focus on the fire, on the notebook, on anything that would anchor me in reality, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was moving in the shadows. Step, pause, step, pause. I got up to stretch, moving slowly, boots creaking on the floor. That's when I noticed the carvings on the wooden beams near the corner of the room. At first, I thought they were natural cracks or marks left by the builders. But the closer I looked, the more deliberate they seemed. Lines, symbols, shapes that suggested eyes, faces, figures. Step, pause, step, pause. My stomach sank, and I suddenly felt very small in that room, as if the cabin itself had grown impatient with my presence, watching me, marking me, measuring me. I returned to the fire, tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself I was just seeing things. Step, pause, step, pause. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It pressed against me like the cold outside, subtle but unmistakable. I could feel it in my chest, in my hands, in the back of my neck. The cabin was not just a building. It was a presence, patient, deliberate, and aware. Hours blurred together. I moved from room to room, checking corners, sweeping my flashlight across the walls. Nothing moved, yet everything seemed alive. Step, pause, step, pause. The furniture, the carvings, the shadows, the firelight, all of it pressed and insistent, like the cabin was testing me, observing my every thought, my every fear. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about the shapes outside, the carvings, the quiet rhythm that seemed to echo from the very walls. Step, pause, step, pause. At some point, I heard a soft thud like a footstep above me. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. Step, pause, step, pause. My mind raced. The cabin was supposed to be empty. I was supposed to be alone. And yet, there was again. Thud, pause, thud, pause. The rhythm matched everything else. The pulse I had felt since I arrived. Patient, deliberate, aware. I moved carefully to the staircase leading to the loft. Step, pause, step, pause. Each step seemed louder than the last, echoing against the walls, against the floor, against the shadows. I reached the top and shone my flashlight around. Nothing, just a loft, empty and still. Step, pause, step, pause. And yet, the thud had been real. Or at least, I told myself it had been. Step, pause, step, pause. I retreated back downstairs, heart hammering, sweat prickling my skin despite the cold. I sat back by the fire, trying to focus on breathing, on the notebook, anything. Step, pause, step, pause. The wind outside continued its whispering, rattling the window, brushing against my thoughts. Step, pause, step, pause. And then I heard it again, soft, deliberate, like something was walking just outside the door. Step, pause, step, pause. I wanted to run, but the road was far and the night was dark and deep. Step, pause, step, pause. I reminded myself that it was just a cabin. Old, isolated, quiet. That was all. And yet, every shadow seemed deliberate. Every creak, every sigh of wind, every flicker of firelight pressed against me, aware of me, marking me. Step, pause, step, pause. By the time morning came, pale light creeping through the frost, I was exhausted. My notebook lay open but mostly unread, my hand shaking. Step, pause, step, pause. I realized then that the cabin had not changed. Nothing had moved. And yet, I felt different. The rhythm in my chest, the pulse I could not shake, the awareness pressing against me. They were all still there, patient, deliberate, waiting. Even now, when I think back to that first night, I can feel it. Step, pause, step, pause. The cabin isn't just a place. It's alive in a way I cannot fully explain. And I know that when I return, or when anyone else steps inside, it will still be there, watching, marking, patient, deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. That was my first assignment, and I never forgot it. It didn't take long for me to notice them, the guests who were never really there. At first, I thought I was imagining things, the loneliness of the cabin, making shadows twist and shapes flicker where they shouldn't. But then the details piled up, subtle at first, until I could no longer ignore them. Step, pause, step, pause. I was sitting at the small wooden table in the main room, scribbling in my notebook, trying to make sense of the creaks and groans of the cabin. The wind rattled the windows, and outside, the pines swayed like dark sentinels in a ghostly rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. Then there was a knock at the door. Sharp, deliberate. My heart jumped. I hadn't expected anyone. No one knew I was here. Step, pause, step, pause. I went to the door and opened it, flashlight cutting through the darkness. A man stood there tall, coat wet from the rain, eyes too still. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, patient, deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. I asked if he needed help, if he was lost, but he just nodded and stepped inside, dripping water onto the floorboards. I felt a chill as he crossed the threshold, though the room had been warm moments before. Step, pause, step, pause. He made no sound as he moved, as if his steps left no trace, no echo. Step, pause, step, pause. I offered him a chair, a drink, anything to make him comfortable, but he only stood near the fireplace, staring at the walls as if they spoke to him. Step, pause, step, pause. I tried to make small talk, asking his name, where he came from, but his eyes never left the shadows. I realized then that he wasn't here to talk, not really. Step, pause, step, pause. After a while, he simply left. No goodbye, no acknowledgement of my presence, just vanished through the door into the night. Step, pause, step, pause. I checked outside, the rain slicking the boards, the forest dark and empty. Nothing. And yet, I could still feel in the room, as if his presence had seeped into the floorboards, the walls, the air itself. Step, pause, step, pause. It wasn't long before more appeared. A woman one evening, dripping snow from her boots, carrying a small bag. Step, pause, step, pause. She smiled at me, a hollow smile, and asked if I had seen the lodge's owner. I shook my head. She walked through the cabin, looking at the corners, touching objects lightly, almost reverently. Step, pause, step, pause. Then, as quietly as she arrived, she left. And once again, the forest outside was empty. Step, pause, step, pause. The pattern became clearer over the nights. Guests arrived, sometimes one, sometimes more. Step, pause, step, pause. They spoke rarely, never ate, never slept. They just wanted the cabin, touching walls, glancing at corners, sometimes staring at me, patient, deliberate, and then they left, or at least I never saw them leave. Step, pause, step, pause. I tried to tell myself they were travelers, people who had lost their way in the woods, guided here by the fog and the snow and the dirt roads. But then I checked the registry, a small notebook left by the previous caretaker. Step, pause, step, pause. No one had ever arrived. No entry for the dates I had seen them. No signatures. Just my own name, repeated each night as I wrote down the weather, the wind, the things I had seen. Step, pause, step, pause. I began to notice small traces, wet footprints that stopped in midair, chairs slightly moved from where I had left them, the faint smell of perfume or smoke that vanished as soon as I tried to follow it. Step, pause, step, pause. I wasn't imagining it. Something had been here, marking the cabin, lingering in the corners, patient, deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. One night, I was sitting near the fireplace, notebook open, when I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder. Step, pause, step, pause. I spun around, but the room was empty. The firelight danced across the walls, but there was no one there. Step, pause, step, pause. And yet, the sense of being observed pressed against me, heavier than ever. I could feel the eyes, deliberate and patient, tracing me across the room. Step, pause, step, pause. I tried to leave once, thinking that if I stepped outside and into the snow, the presence would vanish. Step, pause, step, pause. But as soon as I opened the door, the guests appeared, not outside, but reflected in the frost on the windows, shadows moving just beyond the firelight. Step, pause, step, pause. Faces blurred and shifting, smiling faintly, watching, patient and deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. I began to dread the night. Step, pause, step, pause. I dreaded the hours when the wind howled and the shadows lengthened, when the forest pressed closer and the cabin breathed around me. Step, pause, step, pause. The guests were patient. They were deliberate. They came without warning. They left without explanation, and I could never find them outside the walls of the cabin. Step, pause, step, pause. I started writing their names in my notebook. Guesses, fragments of memory. Faces I thought I remembered, but the names didn't stick. Step, pause, step, pause. The pages seemed to resist recording them, curling at the edges, fading in the firelight, as if the cabin itself didn't want me to remember. Step, pause, step, pause. I realized slowly that they weren't real in the usual sense. Step, pause, step, pause. They were memories, echoes, perhaps shadows of the lodge itself. Patient and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. Each visitor left a mark on me, a pulse I could feel in my chest, a rhythm I could not escape. Step, pause. Step, pause. The worst was that I began to see them in daylight. Step, pause. Step, pause. Reflections in mirrors, faint movements at the edge of my vision, shapes in the snow outside that vanished when I approached. Step, pause. Step, pause. I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if the cabin was simply revealing itself, patient and deliberate, in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Step, pause. Step, pause. Some nights, I tried to sleep, but the whispers of footsteps, the brushing of air, the faint murmurs of voices kept me awake. Step, pause. Step, pause. I lay in the small bed, listening to the walls, listening to the shadows, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. The guests that were never there had already touched me, and I would never be alone again in that cabin. Step, pause. Step, pause. I began leaving small notes around the cabin. Messages for anyone else who might come, warnings, or perhaps records of what I had seen. Step, pause. Step, pause. But the notes were never read by anyone but me, and sometimes I would find the move rewritten in faint, deliberate strokes I could not replicate. Step, pause. Step, pause. The cabin was alive in its own way, patient, deliberate, and aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. By the end of my first week, I had stopped trying to understand the visitors. Step, pause. Step, pause. I recorded their presence, acknowledged their patience, and learned to exist alongside them without resisting. Step, pause. Step, pause. It was easier in a way to accept them than to fight against the sense that the cabin had already claimed me in some small, deliberate way. Step, pause. Step, pause. Even now, when I speak of it, I can feel them at the edges of my memory. Step, pause. Step, pause. Patient, deliberate, watching, waiting for the next person who will step across the threshold, into the cabin, into their patient awareness. Step, pause. Step, pause. The guests were never there, and yet they always were. It started with the letters. At first, I thought they were the work of wind or rain, smudges left on the door by the storm. Step, pause. Step, pause. But then I noticed the shapes, careful, deliberate symbols, carved or drawn, in a hand that was patient and deliberate. And they weren't in any language I recognized. Not English. Not anything I'd seen in the books or newspapers I had brought. Step, pause. Step, pause. I remember first time I saw one. I had stepped outside to check the firewood stacked near the porch. Step, pause. Step, pause. The door was closed, locked, as I always kept it, but etched across the weather were lines and curves that shimmered faintly in the early morning light. Step, pause. Step, pause. I ran my fingers over them, but they felt cold, almost alive, pulsing beneath the surface of the wood. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tried to photograph it, thinking I could analyze it later. But when I looked at the screen, the shape shifted. Step, pause. Step, pause. No matter the angle, no matter the light, they seemed to crawl across the surface, leaving the letters on the door changing every few minutes. Step, pause. Step, pause. I felt a chill deep in my chest. Patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. The next day, there were more letters. Step, pause. Step, pause. This time on the window frames, on the beam above the fireplace, on the small cupboard in the kitchen. Step, pause. Step, pause. All drawn in the same careful hand. Symbols that made no sense, but that I could feel pressing against my thoughts. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tried to ignore them, to rationalize them, but the feeling of being watched, of something deliberate and patient in the room, kept me from settling. Step, pause, step, pause. I began recording them in my notebook, sketches of the shapes, trying to make sense of the pattern. Step, pause, step, pause. Sometimes the letters formed shapes I thought I recognized. Faces, eyes, hands reaching. But when I looked closer, they twisted and changed before my eyes. Step, pause, step, pause. My own notes seemed inadequate, incapable of capturing the true form. Step, pause, step, pause. I tried to tell myself it was a prank. Step, pause, step, pause. That someone had followed me here, somehow knowing the cabin would be empty, and was leaving these messages as a joke. But the nearest road was miles away, the forest thick and unyielding, and I hadn't seen a single person for days. Step, pause, step, pause. And then there was the handwriting itself. Step, pause, step, pause. So precise, so deliberate, as if whoever or whatever made it had an infinite patience. Step, pause, step, pause. Night brought a new terror. Step, pause, step, pause. I slept fitfully, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Step, pause, step, pause. And in the shadows, I began to see the letters moving, faintly at first, as though the candlelight flicker cast shapes that weren't there. Step, pause, step, pause. Then the movements grew more obvious. The letters slid along the walls, curling like smoke, reaching for me, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. I began to speak to them, foolishly, whispering into the dark. Step, pause, step, pause. What do you want? I asked. Who are you? Step, pause, step, pause. There was no answer, only the subtle shiver in the air, the pulse that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Step, pause, step, pause. I felt it in my chest, a rhythm I could not escape. Step, pause, step, pause. Each day, new letters appeared. Step, pause, step, pause. On the door, on the floorboards, along the stairs leading to the loft. Step, pause, step, pause. They multiplied faster than I could record them, twisting and bending into forms that made my mind ache. Step, pause, step, pause. I began to fear leaving the cabin, because the letters followed me. Step, pause, step, pause. I turned my back for a moment, only to find them on the walls behind me, curling into new shapes, patient and deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. I tried washing them off. Step, pause, step, pause. Soap, water, sandpaper. Nothing worked. Step, pause, step, pause. If anything, cleaning the surfaces seemed to anger the letters, making them sharper, more precise, as if mocking my attempts to erase them. Step, pause, step, pause. I could feel a presence in the room, a patient observer who delighted in the futility of my actions. Step, pause, step, pause. Sleep became impossible. Step, pause, step, pause. I lay awake, listening to the walls, listening to the small whispers of the forest beyond the windows, the faint creaks of the cabin settling. Step, pause, step, pause. And all the while, the letters waited, twisting slowly into forms I could not understand, pressing against my thoughts, marking me as surely as they marked the wood. Step, pause, step, pause. I began to dream of them at night. Step, pause, step, pause. Endless rows of symbols stretching into infinity, lines curling into faces, eyes that opened and stared at me from the dark. Step, pause, step, pause. I would wake in a cold sweat, the fire long extinguished, my breath loud in the silence. Step, pause, step, pause. And when I looked at the doors and windows, the letters had changed again, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. Eventually, I stopped trying to understand. Step, pause. Step, pause. I stopped recording the shapes. Stopped trying to photograph them. Step, pause. Step, pause. I only acknowledged them silently when I saw them appear. Step, pause. Step, pause. I whispered into the dark. Small apologies, small acknowledgments, tiny offerings of presence. Step, pause. Step, pause. It became a rhythm, a strange coexistence. Step, pause. Step, pause. The letters on the door, the walls, the furniture, they were patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. And I was part of their rhythm now. Another pulse in the life of the cabin. Moving with them, breathing with them, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. I have come to accept it. Step, pause. Step, pause. The letters are not just marks on wood. Step, pause. Step, pause. They are alive in their own way, speaking a language I cannot read, carrying messages I cannot understand. Step, pause. Step, pause. And I know, deep down, that no one else could survive their scrutiny, their patience, their deliberation. Step, pause. Step, pause. When I leave this cabin, if I ever do, the letters will remain. Step, pause. Step, pause. Patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. And anyone who steps inside will see them, feel them, and know the rhythm of their presence. Step, pause. Step, pause. For now, I live among them. Step, pause. Step, pause. I do not fight. I do not run. Step, pause. Step, pause. I acknowledge their existence, my own small presence in the cabin, and I wait with them, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. It began one evening when the wind had died down, leaving the cabin in a strange, unnatural silence. Step, pause. Step, pause. I was sitting at the table, trying to write in my notebook, when I first heard it, a low, distant echo coming from beneath the cabin. Step, pause. Step, pause. At first, I thought it was the old plumbing or the settling of the wooden floorboards. Step, pause. Step, pause. But the sound persisted, irregular, deliberate, and almost breathing. Step, pause. Step, pause. I moved to the door that led to the small cellar. Step, pause. Step, pause. It had always been locked, a simple wooden door with a rusty padlock. Step, pause. Step, pause. The noises came from below, faint but distinct, like footsteps on stone stairs or the scrape of something dragged across the floor. Step, pause. Step, pause. My heart pounded, and yet some part of me was compelled to see. Step, pause. Step, pause. I found a crowbar in the corner and forced the lock open. Step, pause. Step, pause. The hinges creaked and groaned as if protesting my intrusion. Step, pause. Step, pause. I flipped the light switch, but the bulb flickered and died. Step, pause. Step, pause. Darkness filled the cellar, thick and pressing, carrying with the faint scent of damp earth and something older, something decaying. Step, pause. Step, pause. I lit a small lantern and stepped down the narrow wooden stairs. Step, pause. Step, pause. Each footfall echoed, but beneath it, I could hear something else, a soft, irregular tapping, scratching, almost like a rhythm. Step, pause. Step, pause. I froze, the lantern trembling in my hand. Step, pause. Step, pause. My mind tried to explain it. Rats, perhaps, or the old foundation settling. Step, pause. Step, pause. But the sound was too deliberate, too patient, too aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. The cellar opened into a small tunnel, just tall enough to walk crouched. Step, pause. Step, pause. The walls were lined with stone, slick with moisture, and the floor was uneven, jagged. Step, pause. Step, pause. I followed the noise deeper into the passage, each step making my skin prickle, each shadow more menacing than the last. Step, pause. Step, pause. The tapping, the scratching, now seemed to move with me, staying just ahead, just out of sight. Step, pause. Step, pause. I came to a wooden door at the end of the passage. Step, pause. Step, pause. It had no handle, no lock, just a crude barrier of planks. Step, pause. Step, pause. The sounds were louder here, sharper, as though whatever was making them was waiting, patient and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. I pressed my ear to the door. Step, pause. Step, pause. Whispers? Not quite words, but soft murmurs, hissing and faintly urgent, like warnings or invitations I could not decipher. Step, pause. Step, pause. I pushed the door slowly, the wood splintering beneath my hands. Step, pause. Step, pause. Beyond it, the passage opened into a wide, circular chamber, dark as night. Step, pause. Step, pause. The noises were louder now, echoing around me, bouncing off walls I could not see, crawling along the ceiling, alive and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. I could feel the pressure in the air, as though the chamber itself was breathing. Step, pause. Step, pause. There was nothing visible, nothing I could touch, but the sound moved closer. Step, pause. Step, pause. A scraping along the stone floor, slow and measured, echoing in every direction. Step, pause. Step, pause. My lantern flickered and threatened to die, throwing shadows that twisted and danced across the walls. Step, pause. Step, pause. I felt eyes on me, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tried to turn back, to leave, but the passage seemed longer than before, the stairs farther, the air heavier. Step, pause. Step, pause. Every step echoed unnaturally, multiplying in the silence, and the noises from below grew sharper, urgent, insistent. Step, pause. Step, pause. I stumbled, nearly falling into the uneven floor, and the sound paused. Step, pause. Step, pause. A heartbeat? Not mine. Something else, somewhere beneath the stone, patient and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. I forced myself forward again, each step shaking with fear. Step, pause. Step, pause. And then I saw it. A shadow, not cast by my lantern, moving against the wall, stretching and contracting, following me as if alive. Step, pause. Step, pause. I could feel it watching, patient and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. My hand shook so violently that the lantern swung, and the shadow seemed to retreat, curling back into the dark corners. Step, pause. Step, pause. I had no choice but to retreat. Step, pause. Step, pause. The chamber seemed endless now, stretching and warping, the stairs disappearing into the darkness behind me. Step, pause. Step, pause. The noises followed, patient, deliberate, a rhythm I could not escape. Step, pause. Step, pause. Whispers hissed around me, urgent and soft, curling into my ears, crawling into my mind. Step, pause. Step, pause. I ran, stumbling over stone, scraping my hands on the walls, the lantern swinging wildly. Step, pause. Step, pause. The sounds grew louder, a chorus of steps, scratches, murmurs, breathing, all synchronized, all patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. I burst out of the tunnel, back into the cellar. Step, pause. Step, pause. The door behind me closed with a soft click, though I had not touched it. Step, pause. Step, pause. I collapsed near the bottom of the stairs, trying to catch my breath, my chest heaving, the lantern guttering. Step, pause. Step, pause. The air in the cellar felt heavy, charged, as if the noises had followed me, lingering just beyond my vision. Step, pause. Step, pause. I could feel the patient presence of something below, waiting, deliberate, aware, and I knew it would not be satisfied with silence. Step, pause. Step, pause. By morning, I avoided the cellar entirely. Step, pause. Step, pause. I told myself the noises were echoes, shadows, imagination made real by isolation. Step, pause. Step, pause. But deep down I knew otherwise. Step, pause. Step, pause. The chamber below was alive in its own way, patient and deliberate, and I had touched it, seen it, heard it. Step, pause. Step, pause. Now, when I walk the cabin, I feel it beneath my feet, beneath the floorboards. Step, pause. Step, pause. The noises are never far, patient and deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. Every creak of wood, every wind in the pines, every shadow in the corner carries their rhythm, their insistence. Step, pause. Step, pause. I do not go near the cellar anymore. Step, pause. Step, pause. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the faint scrape of stone, the soft tapping of claws or footsteps, and I know they are waiting. Step, pause. Step, pause. Patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. The cabin has more secrets than I can understand. Step, pause. Step, pause. And the underground passages are only one of them. Step, pause. Step, pause. I cannot stay forever. But I also know that once you hear the sound from below, once you feel the patient, deliberate rhythm, it stays with you long after you leave. Step, pause. Step, pause. I don't stay overnight anymore. Step, pause. Step, pause. Even saying aloud feels strange, as though acknowledging it might make it real again. Step, pause. Step, pause. But I can't lie to myself. After everything I've seen, everything I've felt in this cabin, I know there's something waiting here, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. And it doesn't care if I leave the door open or closed, if I turn my back or face the shadows. Step, pause. Step, pause. The first time I realized I couldn't sleep here, it was after hearing the whispers. Step, pause. Step, pause. Low, indistinct murmurs that rose and fell like the tide, coming from the walls, the floor, the very air itself. Step, pause. Step, pause. I lay awake, heart pounding, staring at the dark corners of the cabin. Step, pause. Step, pause. Shadows seemed to creep just beyond the candlelight, stretching across the walls, curling like smoke, patient and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tried reasoning with myself. Of course. Step, pause. Step, pause. This is an old cabin. I told myself. Old would make sounds. Old houses settle. Rats, perhaps in the walls. Step, pause. Step, pause. But none of those explanations matched what I heard. Step, pause. Step, pause. Footsteps in the attic when no one was there. Step, pause. Step, pause. Soft taps from the cellar that answered nothing I did. Step, pause. Step, pause. It was alive in a way no rat, no draft, no settling could ever be. Step, pause. Step, pause. I began sleeping in my truck outside. Step, pause. Step, pause. Not because it was safer. Not because I thought the threat could reach me there. Step, pause. Step, pause. I did it because my mind could not rest inside that cabin. Step, pause. Step, pause. Every night I stayed inside, I felt its eyes on me, patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. I could almost hear it counting my breaths, listening to my heartbeat, mocking my attempts to pretend it was all in my head. Step, pause. Step, pause. Even during the day, I avoid the second floor. Step, pause. Step, pause. That loft where the shadows gather. Step, pause. Step, pause. Where I once saw a movement that shouldn't have been possible. Step, pause. Step, pause. I leave the light on now, windows open, but it doesn't matter. Step, pause. Step, pause. There is something patient here, deliberate, aware, and it will wait, always wait, until it has what it wants. Step, pause. Step, pause. I tell visitors when they come not to stay overnight. Step, pause. Step, pause. I speak in soft warnings, careful not to scare them too much. Not yet. Step, pause. Step, pause. It's not safe, I say. There are things you don't understand. Step, pause. Step, pause. Most laugh. Some roll their eyes. A few nod politely and leave. Step, pause. Step, pause. None of them have felt what I felt. Step, pause. Step, pause. None of them have seen the patient, deliberate presence that moves when you aren't looking. Step, pause. Step, pause. The air inside the cabin carries a weight, a pressure that is almost tangible. Step, pause. Step, pause. Sometimes, if I step inside to fetch supplies or check the place, I feel it press against my skin, cold and demanding. Step, pause. Step, pause. My own breath feels loud in the silence. Step, pause. Step, pause. Every sound is amplified. The creak of a floorboard, the rustle of curtains, the faint whisper of wind outside. Step, pause. Step, pause. All of it becomes part of the presence. Step, pause. Step, pause. I've tried to leave for long periods, to ignore the cabin entirely. Step, pause. Step, pause. But each time I return, even after weeks, I know it has waited for me. Step, pause. Step, pause. The letters remain patient and deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. The footsteps still echo in the attic. Step, pause. Step, pause. The tapping from below persists. Step, pause. Step, pause. It waits and it remembers. Step, pause. Step, pause. Sometimes I hear things outside too. Step, pause. Step, pause. Rustling in the trees. Faint shapes just beyond my vision. Step, pause. Step, pause. I've seen figures vanish when I approach, and then, a moment later, the sound of soft breathing nearby, as though they are standing just behind me. Step, pause. Step, pause. I've learned not to look over my shoulder. Step, pause. Step, pause. Looking only invites its attention. Step, pause. Step, pause. I've come to dread the nights most of all. Step, pause. Step, pause. Darkness carries a weight the day cannot imitate. Step, pause. Step, pause. Shadows stretch and twist, the walls breathe, and every corner hides patience I cannot match. Step, pause. Step, pause. Once I slept inside. Step, pause. Step, pause. I woke to find the lantern moved, the shadows deeper, and whispers curling around me. Patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause. Step, pause. I never tried sleeping inside again. Step, pause. Step, pause. Even writing this, the memory of it lingers, pressing on me like the cabin itself. Step, pause, step, pause. I can feel it now. Patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. Watching from corners and walls, from beneath the floor, from above. Step, pause, step, pause. It doesn't rush, it doesn't tire. Step, pause, step, pause. It waits, and in that waiting, it controls everything. Step, pause, step, pause. I have tried leaving permanent marks to assert control. Step, pause, step, pause. I've hammered nails into walls, rearranged furniture, burned small piles of paper. Step, pause, step, pause. None of it matters. Step, pause, step, pause. The letters reappear. The shadows stretch. The whispers resume. Step, pause, step, pause. There is no escaping its patience, its deliberation, its awareness. Step, pause, step, pause. I have learned to respect it. Step, pause, step, pause. Not out of reverence, but out of fear. Step, pause, step, pause. I never stay overnight. Step, pause, step, pause. I do not enter the loft. Step, pause, step, pause. I avoid the cellar. Step, pause, step, pause. Every step I take is cautious, measured, a silent acknowledgement that I am not alone and never truly will be. Step, pause, step, pause. Visitors come, sometimes curious, sometimes eager for a story. Step, pause, step, pause. I tell them again, softly, that they should not stay. Step, pause, step, pause. That something waits. Step, pause, step, pause. That the cabin is patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. I've seen the curious ones leave with pale faces, glances over their shoulders as if they feel what I feel. Step, pause, step, pause. I never sleep inside anymore. Step, pause, step, pause. The cabin waits. Step, pause, step, pause. The whispers, the shadows, the letters, the footsteps, the tapping from below. They are all patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. And I know that anyone who ignores the warnings will find themselves caught in its rhythm, its presence, its patience. Step, pause, step, pause. I only visit in daylight now and then briefly. Step, pause, step, pause. I avoid the loft. Step, pause, step, pause. I stay far from the cellar. Step, pause, step, pause. I move quickly, but I always feel it. Step, pause, step, pause. Patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. Waiting. Step, pause, step, pause. I never stay overnight. Step, pause, step, pause. I warn those who come after me. Step, pause, step, pause. But deep down, I know they will ignore the warnings, just as I did at first. Step, pause, step, pause. And the cabin will be patient, deliberate, aware. Step, pause, step, pause. Just as it always has been. Step, pause, step, pause.